A sound of grinding gears echoes in the young man's mind. It has been there for as long as he can remember, a constant companion that creeps in at unexpected moments, freezing him at every crossroad. Whenever he hears it, he can do nothing but stop and think. This feeling makes the world seem like a puppet show, crafted by some unseen hand. He questions if they are all just puppets, moved by invisible strings, their lives merely scenes in a grand design orchestrated from above. The pressure of this thought becomes unbearable. From within a grand academy building, a desperate cry rings out, a voice declaring it can't take it anymore. Inside, a young man with blonde hair stands with his hand over his heart. He introduces himself as Edward, the first prince, and loudly proclaims the annulment of his engagement to Adrian. He declares he will stay true to his one and only love, Lady Crystal. In response to the prince's declaration, the first young man shouts his agreement, affirming that His Highness Edward is absolutely correct. He finds himself with his hand raised, a look of confusion on his face, as if the action was not his own. The sound of gears grinds once more as he introduces himself to the assembly, Roland Valery, Oriole. His narration explains his unique heritage. He was born with the distinctive blessing of Oriole, azure hair and violet eyes, the undeniable proof of a hero throughout history. His birth, the first in 30 years to bear these marks, was the moment a legend became reality. As a child, he could easily wield the legendary Holy Sword, a weapon said to be usable only by heroes. Yet, despite this proof of his destiny, a complication arose. The world had entered a peaceful era. Dragons are now considered endangered, and even the Demon King lives quietly in obscurity. In such a time, the Holy Sword had become nothing more than a useless relic. The sword, Belgrade, is now just a spectacle displayed to draw crowds and earn offerings. This leaves Roland as the so-called unemployed hero. He is the eldest son of the Duke Oriole family, one of the 5 great houses whose influence rivals even the royal family. He stood beside the prince, feeling less like a hero and more like a sycophant, just attendant A in a play he didn't write. His mind flashed back to the moment it all began, the shock still palpable as he recalled the prince's words. An engagement annulment? It couldn't be. The memory continued. Prince Edward had clapped enthusiastically, declaring he knew Roland would agree. As Adrian glared with fury, the prince announced they had found proof. The prince then addressed the assembled crowd, proclaiming the evidence was undeniable proof that Adrian had tried to frame Lady Crystal. He implored everyone to lend their support and declare that the matter of Adrian's wrongdoing would be settled at the graduation party, 6 months from then. His words ignited the room. A chorus of supporters roared their approval for His Highness. Roland, caught in the tide, realized the prevailing sentiment. Anyone foolish enough to be swayed by a wicked woman like Adrian should be cast aside without hesitation. The memory of the event faded, leaving him alone in his study. He clutched his head, overwhelmed. How had it all come to this? He agonized over the details. The plan was supposed to be foolproof. He had advised the prince and his inner circle to keep the annulment quiet for now, to handle it subtly. But he knew, even then, that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. His troubled thoughts were suddenly shattered by a woman's voice. A maid stood over him, asking if he, and she as well, had finally come to their senses. He let out a startled cry, demanding to know who she was and how she had entered. The woman, introducing herself as Elena Qualiard, the all-purpose maid of the Oriole household, calmly explained that to avoid making unnecessary noise, she had simply come in through the ceiling. She stepped forward, asking what he thought when he looked at her. Flustered, Roland could only comment that her uniform looked clean. Elena pressed on, pointing out the ribbon in her hair, a gift from him 5 years prior, and her new perfume, leaving him utterly bewildered. He stood bewildered, questioning what had just transpired with his maid. Before he could fully process her sudden appearance, she thanked him for his care and announced she would immediately fetch Lady Ruin. Just then, a young woman burst into the room, addressing him as her older brother. It was Ruin. She demanded to know if he had finally returned to his senses, then immediately pressed him for his opinion on Prince Edward, his circle of influential heirs, and Baroness Crystal. He paused to consider her pointed question. After a moment, he gave his blunt assessment. Prince Edward is an absolute fool, and the nobles in his faction are merely lemmings eagerly boarding a sinking ship. As for Lady Crystal, he concluded, she is simply a victim, forced to carry the weight of a love-struck prince's ideals and the noble's self-interest. Her expression softened with relief at his words, though she lamented that he had come to this realization far too late. This was Ruin, Roland's cousin, who now held the title of his younger sister. Elena, having returned, agreed. She recounted how strange his behavior had been for the past 6 months, filled with endless praise for Lady Crystal and constant complaints about Lady Adrian. It was so unlike him, she explained, that they had all been deeply worried. Ruin added that Lady Adrian is so graceful, while Elena concluded that the young master had been far too influenced by those fools. He absorbed their words, a troubled look crossing his face as he sank into a chair. Everyone could see his strange behavior, but he himself couldn't understand why he had lost control. Seeing his internal struggle, Ruin gently asked him to explain what had happened. His explanation began with a memory from 1 year prior. Lady Crystal had transferred into their academy, and Prince Edward fell for her instantly. This was despite the fact that his fiancée, Lady Adrian, had already been chosen by the king himself. For a prince to relentlessly pursue a baron's daughter was unthinkable, and the duke's faction grew concerned, foreseeing disaster. He remembered his own weary reaction to the prince's infatuation at the time, a resigned sigh escaping him as he thought, "Here we go again." This was nothing new. Having observed Prince Edward since childhood, he was all too familiar with his impulsive and emotional nature, recalling the endless stream of praise for Crystal at Adrian's expense. The memory then plunged deeper into the past, to when both he and the prince were merely 8 years old. Prince Edward had made an absurdly serious demand of the king and queen to make Roland his official wife, proclaiming him more charming than Adrian. The young prince had even formally presented this ridiculous request, causing a young Roland to panic at the thought of the social upheaval such a union would require. He continued to reflect on the prince's nature. To put a positive spin on it, Edward was bold and decisive. He never bent to the opinions of others, a stubbornness that, while selfish, could be seen as a reliable quality for a nation's leader. That said, Roland acknowledged that the prince had far too many flaws. To compensate for these shortcomings, a group of talented individuals, including Roland himself, had been gathered around him. Yet, the effort was ultimately in vain. Before he realized it, the prince had become the very thing he and the others had been trying to prevent. Ruin explains the grim reality of the situation. In order to marry Lady Crystal, Prince Edward and his supporters have conspired to paint Lady Adrian as a villain, concocting an outrageous plan to break their engagement. She notes that even her brother, Roland, and the other salon members were supporting this scheme. Elena adds a more dire detail. Other young noblemen, completely infatuated with Lady Crystal, have begun to follow the prince's lead, nonsensically accusing their own fiancés and demanding their engagements be annulled. She calls it a hellish scene, leaving Roland to listen in stunned silence. He processes this, his expression hardening. The salon members, who should be the ones to stop the prince, are instead supporting him. Roland understands the terrifying implication. The prince's word is absolute. If he commands it, they could easily fabricate evidence or find false witnesses to frame Lady Adrian for attempting to harm Lady Crystal. The sheer power they wield is frightening. His thoughts spiral to the wider consequences. If the prince breaks the engagement without the king's permission, it would shatter the aristocratic system and ruin the crown's reputation. From abroad, other nations would perceive it as the country collapsing, which could, at worst, lead to an invasion. As he contemplates this, Elena turns to Ruin, asking for her thoughts. She points out that Ruin is the only one in the family with the same lion blue hair and violet eyes as Roland. Ruin simply states that she was blessed by Oriole. Ruin elaborates that because of this blessing, she was welcomed into the main family as an adopted daughter. This prompts Roland to reflect on his own title. The hero of Oriole was once just a fairy tale, but he proved the legend was real, bringing glory to the Oriole ducal family and earning the people's support. Elena, however, voices a grave concern. If that very hero were to now align with those foolish nobles, he would be seen as betraying the people's trust and would surely be hated for it. The weight of this possibility settles heavily on Roland. The realization dawns on Ruin, her face pale with fear. She understands that if Roland hadn't regained his senses, she and Elena could have met the same fate, branded as witches. Elena shudders, agreeing that they would have been dragged down and punished as well. Ruin turns to her brother, asking if he finally understands the gravity of it all. Humbled, Roland can only agree and apologize. He now fully comprehends the situation. His expression shifts to one of focused determination as he brings a hand to his chin. It is time, he declares, to figure out what to do next. He begins to formulate a plan. The first step is to convince Prince Edward and the others to change their minds, to make them understand the consequences of their foolish actions, so the plan goes no further. He envisions a scenario where everyone involved, including Lady Adrian, offers a sincere apology, leading to a happy end for all parties. Hearing this idealistic proposal, Ruin remarks that it sounds ideal, but her tone is skeptical. She immediately challenges him, questioning if he truly believes such a perfect solution is achievable within the next 6 months. Roland is caught off guard, his confidence faltering. She presses further, reminding him of the past. At first, she says, even he and the other salon members were frowning upon the prince's selfishness. They all knew it was wrong. With a piercing gaze, she asks the critical question, when did he change his mind? He has no answer. Roland looks away, admitting that he honestly doesn't know. It just happened, without any of them realizing it. His mind drifts to an image of Lady Crystal as he wonders aloud, to himself, why they all became so captivated by someone they had just met. He began to recount the events, explaining to Elena that he believed it all started shortly after Lady Crystal transferred to the academy. The first time he ever spoke to her, he recalled, was when she approached him in the school building. He continued, stating that after their initial meeting, they happened to run into each other several more times. Ruin immediately questioned if he felt a sense of fate in those moments, but he insisted that at the time, she seemed like a perfectly ordinary girl. Elena, however, repeated his words with a hint of suspicion. To illustrate, he recalled specific instances, reaching for the same book in a library, helping her when she tripped, or assisting her search for a dropped item. Before he realized it, The prince's infatuation seemed to have spread to him, leaving him unable to stop thinking about Crystal. As he finished, Ruin remarked that it all felt far too convenient, questioning if so many coincidences could truly happen so perfectly. Elena conceded that from what she'd seen from afar, Lady Crystal was a delicate and charming young woman, so it wouldn't be strange for someone to develop feelings for her after a few meetings. He countered that every time they met, he was acting on impulse or doing something random. It wasn't as if she could have planned for their encounters. The only explanation he could offer was coincidence, and he resolved to simply call it that for now. Ruin then pointed out that the other members of the salon had also been completely captivated, leading them to fully support Prince Edward's romance with her. Roland found this deeply strange, as they'd all known the prince and Crystal were a couple from the start, yet no one felt jealous. Instead, they all cheered for them wholeheartedly. He considered Prince Edward's possessive and single-minded nature, realizing the prince would never allow such a situation to continue. Yet, for 6 months, Edward had been fully aware of his retainer's feelings for Crystal and accepted it without doubting their loyalty. The only conclusion he could draw was that it was as if they had all been enchanted. They were treating the prince and Crystal like the main characters of a fairy tale, doing everything possible to eliminate any obstacles in their path. Hearing this, Ruin questioned the theory. If Lady Crystal was using magic, how could it work on him? She reminded him that since childhood, he had been blessed by Oberon and Titania, the fairy king and queen, which meant magic and curses shouldn't affect him. He acknowledged her point, adding that the academy itself is protected by the best anti-magic barriers and overseen by court mages. Could she have bypassed all of that to cast a spell? Despite the impossibilities, he concluded that the situation was undeniably strange, and that they must consider the worst-case scenario. He listened as Elena spoke with grim intensity, her hands clasped before her. She argued that there could be no mercy for their enemies. Once hostility is shown, they must be treated as such. She felt a malevolent force was at work, setting gears in motion that would lead to destruction. Therefore, she insisted, they must act swiftly and decisively, destroying their foes before they themselves are destroyed. His sister, Ruin, agreed enthusiastically. She added that he, her brother, will be there to help everyone facing misfortune. She framed the conflict as an opportunity that would benefit both their country and their family, allowing them to finally deal with those they considered foolish people once and for all. She continued, explaining a trait of the women in their family. Once they perceive someone as an enemy, they eliminate them without a second thought. Beaming, she declared the whole prospect fantastic. Fired up by this, Elena clenched her fist and shouted that they must swiftly take care of their enemies. He, however, remained silent, his expression troubled. The entire situation felt completely unjust to him. The happiness Prince Edward envisioned with Lady Crystal was, in his mind, built upon the suffering of the innocent Lady Adrian. This fundamental injustice did not sit right with him, and he quietly acknowledged this grim reality to himself. As he stood with his back to the others, lost in these thoughts, Elena watched him with a steady, determined gaze. She then spoke, her voice firm and clear, announcing that she had made up her mind. Amidst the refined atmosphere of a department store, a crisis erupts. As Roland and Adrian stand together, a shout cuts through the rising panic, demanding everyone to wait. One of the perpetrators, brandishing a dagger, threatens to kill the female hostages, claiming to possess a bomb. Roland quickly assesses the situation. The weapons are real, but the bomb is likely a bluff. He decides against provoking them, instead stepping forward to address the man, calmly asking to stop the violence. He continues his attempt at de-escalation, speaking of communication as a bridge to mutual understanding. His words only enrage the man, who screams for him to shut up. Before the situation can worsen, another voice cuts in sharply, ordering the man, Igor, to stand down. This newcomer, Kirill, is immediately challenged by a large, armored accomplice. The armored man argues for killing the rich nobles to make an example of them, but Kirill counters, explaining that nobles are far more valuable as hostages or tools for negotiation. With the immediate danger quelled by the internal dispute, Adrian turns to Roland with a sigh of exasperation. She remarks that if he intended to stop the man, he should have done so sooner. Roland, brushing his hair aside, merely notes that his bangs are now a mess. Later, the scene has shifted. Adrian is now speaking with Lady Ruin, thanking her for the exhibition tickets she had provided. She expresses her genuine gladness that Ruin was able to attend. Ruin smiles and gestures to her companion, introducing her as their maid, Elena Qualiard. In another conversation, Adrian offers a cool greeting to one of Prince Edward's attendants. She then makes a pointed remark, finding it concerning that the prince's fiancée has such a poor memory that she cannot even recall people's names. The attendant presses, noting she has avoided the salon for 6 months. Adrian retorts that she only remembers those who interest her. With a sharp smile, she adds that she has heard rumors of a certain charming individual warming her seat, a clear jab at his new relationship. Her words leave him speechless. She stands firm, her expression making it clear that any reconciliation or alliance with her feels almost impossible. Watching from a distance, Roland is struck with profound regret. He admits to himself that even if he was out of his mind when he wronged her, it was still his fault, and she has every right to be so harsh. He is immediately confronted by one of the hostage-takers, who scoffs at his noble status. The man declares his hatred for the carefree attitude of the aristocracy, while Roland hesitantly admits he is, in a way, a noble. The man continues his tirade, assuming Roland has never had a struggle for money or women. Roland attempts to protest, but his captor cuts him off, insisting that his privileged life is perfectly clear at a glance. He reveals that he comes from a backwater village and hadn't even worn proper wooden clogs before arriving in the city. He bitterly asks Roland if he has any idea how miserable it feels to have neither money nor the affection of women. Roland looks on, taken aback. Suddenly, Adrienne's voice cuts through the tension. She declares that there is no way she could possibly understand his feelings. While acknowledging his upbringing might warrant some sympathy, she admonishes him that it doesn't justify resorting to crime. She tells him to reflect on his own foolishness first, suggesting his personality, not his poverty, is why women dislike him. From nearby, Elena loudly proclaims that Adrienne is absolutely right. The other hostage-taker, stunned by the women's defiance, asks if they all belong to Roland, who can only stare in shocked silence. He closes his eyes, a bead of sweat trickling down his face, and quietly pleads with them to just keep quiet if they are worried about him. Ignoring his plea, the light-haired woman cheerfully identifies Adrienne as Roland's little sister, before correcting herself to say that Adrienne actually has a complicated crush on him. Elena then introduces herself as the young master's maid, his loyal hound who knows all his secrets. A flustered Adrienne insists she meant a loyal servant to the Oriole family, not just him. The main captor, now thoroughly confused, asks if Adrienne isn't with Roland. Elena attempts to clarify their complicated and, in her words, disgraceful relationship. She explains that as nobles, they exchange formalities while also occasionally stabbing each other with words, only to be stabbed in return. Adrienne cries out her name in exasperation. Having reached his breaking point, Roland bellows for them to stop provoking him, shouting that he's had enough. The captor clutches his head, overwhelmed by the chaos. His patience shattered, the man roars for Roland to shut up and die, lunging forward with his sword. Roland, caught off guard, suggests they talk it out. The armored captor observes that their group is now united in their intent to attack, as the women urge Roland to take care of them quickly. As the attacker lunged, Roland met the threat not with fear, but with a resigned sigh. He concluded there was no other choice. With a sudden, powerful cry, he surged forward, cane in hand. Behind him, Elena watched in stunned disbelief, calling out for him to wait. A thought struck her with the force of a revelation. Could this be the true power of the holy sword wielder? Inside a grand hall, Roland Valerie Oriole sweats, his mind reeling from the recent confrontation. He is being admonished for his recklessness, with his interrogator questioning his sanity for facing an armed group with only a cane. Observing the exchange from a distance are his maid, Elena, and an older, mustached butler, both wearing expressions of stern concern. The one lecturing him is Lady Adrienne. She stands before him, her voice sharp with frustration and relief, declaring that they were lucky to apprehend the culprits without injury. She stresses that if things had gone even slightly wrong, it could have been a complete disaster. He struggles to find a response, wondering inwardly what he should do, as she shows no signs of calming down. As his displeasure shows on his face, the butler interjects, advising the young master that he shouldn't show such an expression to a lady. Adrienne, however, is not finished, sighing in exasperation before demanding that Roland stop looking around and pay attention. She continues her lecture, questioning if he realizes the weight of the many subjects and citizens he carries on his shoulders. Roland retorts with a dismissive smile that of course he doesn't, which is why he acted so recklessly. Internally, however, he concedes that she might be right, though being lectured so intensely is difficult to endure. From afar, two young noblemen observe the scene. One wonders aloud if Prince Edward became so jaded from being constantly lectured in this manner. The other agrees it's a valid point, adding that the prince was, after all, raised being spoiled. The tense atmosphere is broken when the light-haired young woman addresses Lady Adrienne directly. She confesses that she was actually quite captivated by how gallant her brother-in-law looked when he instantly incapacitated the ruffians. Elena quickly agrees, adding that from the moment they were rescued, all the other ladies who were saved were gazing at the young master with misty, admiring eyes. The three women reflect on the situation. For the hero to be scolded by the princess he saved, it is, they agree, a difficult world they live in. Absolutely. She listened as the butler attempted to downplay the events, asking what they were discussing so casually. He explained that Roland had merely raised his cane reflexively, which happened to deflect a blade and set off a chain reaction that tripped up the assailants, allowing for their easy capture. Her expression hardened with skepticism. She challenged the explanation, questioning if they truly believed the process could be ignored as long as the result was favorable. To her, it was clearly more than just luck. At that moment, the light-haired woman interjected, assuring Adrienne that it was not chance at all. She stated with confidence that from the moment he deflected the blade, everything had proceeded according to her brother-in-law's precise calculations. Adrienne's gaze snapped towards Roland, her disbelief evident. She demanded to know if he, a man who was neither the royal fencing instructor nor the captain of the guard, had truly planned the entire affair. With a slightly sheepish smile, he admitted that he had, more or less. He began to explain that while it sounded unbelievable, he had indeed aimed for that outcome. He revealed that he was born as a true chosen hero, naturally endowed with abilities powerful enough to rival dragons and demon lords. Fortunately, his birth in a peaceful era meant he had only needed to use those abilities a few times before. He continued, noting that to avoid confusion, most of his deeds had not been made public. Therefore, he understood why it was difficult for her to believe that he had dealt with the armed group through careful calculation. Seeing Adrienne's lingering doubt, the light-haired woman offered to share some of her brother-in-law's many wonderful anecdotes, suggesting they might convince her. The mention of anecdotes caught Adrienne's attention, just as the woman had a sudden flash of inspiration. She then recounted a shocking story, asking if Adrienne knew that at just 9 years old, Roland had single-handedly defeated 5 assassins targeting His Highness. The memory of a small, determined Roland protecting the young prince flashed before them. Adrienne could only stare, utterly speechless. Adrienne voiced her disbelief, calling the story ridiculous and arguing that such an event would have caused a major commotion. The woman calmly explained that a gag order was issued. It would have been a disgrace to the royal family if it became known that a child had single-handedly protected the prince, but she insisted it was a fact well known to a select few. As the story was told, Roland broke into a nervous sweat. He remembered that day clearly. The excited young prince had been on the verge of running off to tell everyone what Roland had done. The memory was still a source of acute self-awareness for him. He acknowledges her skepticism, admitting that his story is indeed hard to believe. Seizing the opportunity, Elena steps in to offer another piece of evidence. She asks Lady Adrienne if she is familiar with the Dorrance Rebellion incident that occurred in the Demon Lord's territory 5 years prior. The incident refers to a rebellion by the subordinates of the Demon Lord Dorrance. Once a nemesis to humanity in prehistoric times, the Demon Lord now lives peacefully in a neighboring country. His underlings, dissatisfied with this peace, attempted to establish their own autonomous region. Adrienne confirms that she knows of the event, recalling that it was suppressed by foreign troops before a full-scale coup could take place. Elena agrees, but clarifies that this is merely the official story known to the public. She reveals the truth. At the secret request of the current Demon Lord and the Holy Church, Roland single-handedly and covertly suppressed the entire rebel army. This information, she adds, is a state secret known only to a select few. Roland sheepishly remarks that even if he had told this story himself, no one would have believed him, causing Elena to panic at the casual discussion of state secrets. Adrienne, however, simply lets out a light laugh, scoffing at the incredible tale. Undeterred, the light-haired woman beside Roland eagerly offers another example. She brings up the incident from 2 years ago in the royal capital, when the great beast Behemoth went on a rampage. She proudly declares that her brother-in-law, Roland, gallantly saved Prince Edward's sister, who was present at the time. Adrienne's expression changes to one of sudden recognition. She connects the event to a scandalous rumor that was even reported in the newspapers, a supposed passionate love affair between Princess Rosaline and Lord Roland. He realizes with dismay that in the public's mind, only the fabricated love affair remains. He clarifies what truly happened. To protect the spectators from the rampaging behemoth, he swiftly summoned his own beast, Belgrand, and sliced the monster in half. However, because the event took place in a very public location, it drew a great deal of attention. The news was initially set to spread as a heroic tale of Roland defeating the behemoth. But the story that ultimately gained more traction was the love affair report from a gossip magazine. The light-haired woman, Princess Rosaline, explains with a flustered expression that this was because she fell head over heels for Roland's heroic actions. Roland looks completely bewildered by her confession. As Princess Rosaline begins to confess that she unilaterally broke off her engagement with a neighboring prince, Elena quickly clamps a hand over her mouth, silencing her with a muffled cry. Her attempt is not entirely successful, as Adrienne turns, having caught the word engagement, and questioning what it was about. Elena nervously dismisses it, insisting it was nothing. Roland recalls the disastrous fallout. After the princess arbitrarily declared their engagement broken, she began stalking him. Now, she is kept in isolation under the pretext of recuperating from an illness, making the topic utterly taboo. The consequences spiraled further. To prevent exposing such a disgrace to the royal family, the true story of the hero defeating the behemoth was completely buried. In its place, a fabricated report of a love affair was planted in a gossip magazine to control the narrative. He stands by, completely bewildered by the situation, wondering what could possibly be going on in the minds of the royal siblings, Prince Edward and Princess Rosaline, whose actions seemed so erratic. Sensing Adrienne's lingering doubt, Elena pivots, asking if she has perhaps heard of the renowned absolute champion Roland, the man who won the royal capital swordsmanship tournament 4 years in a row. Adrienne places a hand on her chest, confirming that she has indeed heard of him. She admits she would rather not have such an embarrassing title mentioned, but concedes that a reputation of that level might be what's needed for her to believe their story. Roland shrinks in the background, mortified. She then recalls that in the previous tournament, Prince Edward's own confidants dominated the podium. She muses that His Highness must have felt quite proud placing the medals around their necks, but dismisses it as only natural for a festival with a 200-year history. Hearing her casual observation, a thought suddenly strikes Roland. He glances at her, wondering if she thinks the tournament was rigged. Adrienne, however, delivers a sharp verdict. She declares that regardless of the others, Prince Edward himself possesses absolutely no charm without his title. She concludes that people in the salon must choose their allegiances carefully, lest they risk lowering their own standing by associating with him. Her conversation is interrupted by the arrival of her escort, Roland. Bidding farewell to the other ladies, Adrian agrees to chat with Lady Renee another time and prepares to depart. As he watches her, Roland realizes that Adrienne's distrust for the prince's circle is far deeper than he had anticipated. His mind drifts back to their childhood, recalling that they hadn't interacted very much back then. He remembers, however, that their relationship wasn't bad at all. In fact, looking back, he feels it should have been considered quite good. He finds himself wondering if there is any way to return to that simpler time, to that connection they once shared. But the reality of the present weighs on him. He knows that he and the others are to blame for her current feelings. He feels he cannot simply bow his head in apology, leaving him to question what action he should take, especially with the prince involved. Meanwhile, Elena and Princess Rosaline watch the pair depart. They lament their failure, realizing they couldn't convey any of Roland's good qualities and instead only managed to elicit more complaints about Prince Edward. The path forward, they conclude, seems fraught with difficulty. As she walks away, the sound of her heels echoes on the polished floor. Her expression is unreadable, lost in thought. Her mind races, try to make sense of the situation. A single, uncertain question surfaces. What now? Inside a well-appointed room, a maid presents an extravagant bouquet to Lady Adrienne, announcing that a get-well flower arrangement has arrived from Lord Roland and Lady Renee. The maid then observes that, in stark contrast, they haven't received even a token gift from His Highness Edward. Adrienne finishes the thought internally, taking a slow sip of her tea with a placid expression. She tells her maid that it can't be helped, explaining that they are officially supposed to have not been there at the time of the incident. The maid looks on, holding the large bouquet. Her gaze drifts, a flicker of memory crossing her features as she stares into the distance. The memory transports her to the past, to the grounds of a grand palace, where a young boy's indignant voice once shouted, questioning how she could possibly be his fiancée. The scene solidifies, revealing a 7-year-old Prince Edward and a 7-year-old Adrienne. The young prince cruelly declares that she is just an ugly, slant-eyed girl with flashy hair. He continues his tirade, stating that he dislikes red-headed women because they seem too strong-willed. Standing before him, a young Adrienne realizes this must be why her grandfather brought her to the royal palace, though she had never heard anything about an engagement before. The young prince then turns to his father, complaining loudly that he doesn't want to be engaged to such a low-class woman and questioning her disrespectful, silent attitude. In the background, his father sternly tells him to stop. His tantrum reaches a peak as he suggests they give her to his younger brother, Jeremy, instead. His words are cut short by a powerful man's voice roaring, "Fool!" The shout makes young Adrienne flinch. The furious man is revealed to be Adrienne's grandfather, Duke Jardier, who stand with arms crossed, demanding to know how they dare insult his precious granddaughter. In response, the king forces his son's head down in a bow, offering a deep and immediate apology to the duke for the prince's behavior. His fury erupted at the young prince's insolence. When Edward dared to call him the mere duke, he thundered back, reminding the boy that he was addressing the honorary president of the House of Nobles, a man with no right to succession and thus no different from a commoner in his eyes. The prince recoiled in shock. He then turned his wrath upon the king, grabbing the stunned prince by the shoulder. He declared with finality that he would never give his granddaughter to a man with such poor judgment and a rotten personality. It would be the Girardier family, he proclaimed, who would refuse this engagement. His declaration left both the king and his son utterly speechless, their eyes wide with disbelief at the duke's audacity. Faced with such a powerful rebuke, the king immediately humbled himself. He admitted their shortcomings and pleaded for the duke to calm his anger, forcing his son to offer an apology as well. Watching the scene unfold, young Adrienne internally sighed at what a boring man the prince was, still muttering even as his father apologized. She offered her own formal apology, though her thoughts were less than charitable. The memory then shifts back to her arrival. She had been lured by the words royal palace, expecting a grand castle from fairy tale, but found it surprisingly modest. Her gaze drifted to a sturdy tree outside, a much more tempting prospect for adventure. She mused that while her position required her to maintain a certain decorum, she truly preferred playing outside. Her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a gentle voice from behind, greeting the beautiful princess. She turned, startled. Before her stood a young boy with a kind smile. He introduced himself as Roland, the only child of the Duke of Oriol, and politely asked for the honor of knowing her name. Adrienne could only stare, taken aback. Her surprise quickly melted into admiration. She thought he was both cool and cute, a stark contrast to the dim-witted prince she had just met. This, she realized with a blush, was the kind of fairy tale development she had been hoping for. He watched as the young girl, Adrienne, granddaughter of Duke Jardier, formally introduced herself. With a bright smile, he replied that the pleasure was all his. Noticing her gaze from earlier, he mentioned the tree she had been looking at, warning her that its top was withered and dangerous. He then offered to show her other, safer trees that were easier to climb. He cheerfully added that he was also quite good at tree climbing, an activity she likely couldn't enjoy in her current setting. In the background, a frustrated Prince Edward could be seen, still being attended to after his fall. Her younger self, captivated, asked if she could join him. In the present, Adrian recalled the memory, thinking to herself how wonderful Lord Roland had been. Her thoughts were interrupted by a maid, who marveled at receiving flowers, a card, and even a cake from him. Adrian, looking on, quietly affirmed the gesture. The maid gushed about how Roland had also gallantly saved her from thieves before, declaring him strong, cool, and a true gentleman. A flustered Elena tried to temper her excitement as Adrian agreed. She reflected on her past self, who had thought Roland might be all right. But now, she lamented, he was just a dim-witted attendant to the prince, seemingly wrapped around the finger of some baron's daughter. The maid, Sophia, smiled warmly as she read the card, glad to be doing well after the previous day's events. Adrian, however, looked away with a pained expression, thinking that Roland was far from a gentleman. Her mind drifted back to the engagement with the prince that had almost been called off. She remembered how the king's father had pleaded with her own, asking them to believe in his son's potential and future education, until he finally accepted. With a sigh, she thought about how her grandfather had possessed keen insight. She regretted that they hadn't refused the engagement back then, feeling sorry for his majesty but lamenting their decision. Prince Edward approaches Roland, his voice booming with excitement. He announces that he heard from his father about Roland's heroic feat, single-handedly crushing a group of thieves at the Lost Bell department store. Roland looks stunned by the public declaration, realizing they must have made a mistake in his education. His praise echoes through the classroom as he slaps a hand on Roland's desk, proclaiming how truly proud he is. The other students turn to watch the spectacle. He panics, gesturing for the prince to stop. Edward seems utterly confused by the reaction, asking what he's talking about. Roland understands the danger. If it became public that the sons and daughters of ducal houses were endangered at the Lost Bell department store, the owner's reputation would be completely ruined. But the prince continues, a smirk on his face. He explains that to prevent the collapse of the Lost Bell family, which accounts for a significant portion of the country's tax revenue, there is an official cover story. The incident is being reported as a rampage by unruly demons, with civilians caught in the crossfire. Roland is aghast, realizing Edward is loudly discussing something that was meant to be a state secret. He tries to deny everything, claiming he wasn't even at the department store that day and that Edward must be confusing him with someone else. The memory of a stern warning to never speak of the incident flashes through his mind. The prince abruptly changes his tune, laughing and claiming he must have been mistaken. Roland watches him, wary of the sudden shift. Edward then leans in, stating there's one more thing he wants to ask. He reveals his intention to give Miss Crystal a gift to commemorate the upcoming spring festival. He suggests a ruby brooch might be nice and asks for Roland's opinion. Roland's expression darkens, his annoyance clear. He internally fumes at the prince's audacity. Ignoring his own fiancée to give a gift to an unrelated woman is insane. Furthermore, he believes Miss Crystal would likely be troubled by such an extravagant and sudden present. For now, however, he decides to play along. He suggests that the thought itself would make her happy, proposing emeralds or pearls as alternatives. Edward considers this, noting the symbolic meanings of fulfillment of love for emeralds and purity for pearls, deeming them suitable for Miss Crystal. With renewed determination, he declares he will prepare the highest quality of both gems. As he speaks, the classroom door slides open, and Adrian enters, her expression unreadable as she clutches a book. The prince stops mid-sentence, his eyes widening in surprise at her sudden appearance. He paid his fiancée no mind, instead turning his full attention to Crystal the next morning in the classroom. With a beaming smile, he loudly declared that he had saved his seat for her and urged her to come sit next to him. A flustered Crystal could only manage a stammered "good morning" in reply. As the prince's boisterous display continued, Adrian watched with a cold, impassive expression. A small, gnome-like figure suddenly appeared, ringing a bell and announcing that class was starting. In the background, the instructor began a lecture on legends, speaking of an enchantment feared as the evil eye. She ignored the lecture, her thoughts consumed by the scene before her. Roland, sitting nearby, observed her distraction. He recalled Crystal's full name, Crystal Rita Chesty, daughter of a baron, and wondered why she was suddenly being put on a pedestal, particularly only among the salon members. Adrian, meanwhile, conceded that Crystal was cute, but found she no longer felt anything for the girl. Her quiet reflection was broken by the prince's continued advances. He leaned toward Crystal, asking if something was wrong. Roland found the display intensely annoying. He understood being captivated by a lovely appearance, but thought to himself that it was not admirable to stare so openly. A chill ran down his spine as he realized how terrifying it was that, until recently, he had seriously followed such a man. This unsettling thought solidified his resolve. He wondered where his maid, Elena, had gone. He decided it was necessary to look into Crystal's situation again and made a mental note to have Elena double-check everything when he returned home. Within a cluttered room overlooking a grand castle, a young boy sits up in bed, a hollow laugh escaping his lips as he gazes out the window. His hand reaches for the curtain, pulling it aside just enough to peer down into the ground below. From his vantage point, he spots two other boys. One, a child with dark hair, looks up with wide eyes. The other, a blond boy, recognizes the watcher, identifying him as Jeremy and noting that he's there again. The blond boy grabs his friend, Roland, by the arm, urging him to leave. He complains that Jeremy is always watching them in silence, finding it creepy. A startled Roland glances back up toward the window. He stands frozen for a moment, staring back at the window from which he was being watched. Back in his room, Jeremy reflects on the boy, Roland, a commoner who's been associating with his older brother, Prince Edward. He questions the boy's intentions. This is Jeremy, the second prince and younger brother to Edward, his expression cool and calculated. A young woman with a concerned look on her face is introduced, Constance, who is Jeremy's fiancée. She stands in a vast, book-lined study, watching as Jeremy sits at his desk, his back turned to her and a maid. He is surrounded by towering stacks of books, lost in his own world. His impassive face is reflected on the dark surface of the tea in his cup, a perfect mirror of his quiet intensity. He listened as his fiancée, Constance, concluded her report with a nervous tremor in her voice. She confirmed that this was the full account of what had transpired at the Lost Bell department store. She continued, explaining that while the incident didn't escalate into a major event, they were unfortunately unable to inflict any particular damage on Adrienne's side. She assured him that multiple precautions had been taken to ensure their involvement would not be exposed, and that the direct perpetrators had already been dealt with. He remained silent, his expression unreadable. Undeterred, Constance affirmed their ongoing strategy. They would continue to spread rumors that Adrienne's faction was harassing Crystal. She added that they were prepared to harm Crystal directly if necessary, hoping that if actual harm was done, Prince Edward's faction would lose patience and take action, leading to their mutual downfall. His gaze remained cool as he finally spoke. He stated that he didn't mind if she wanted to settle personal grudges, as her targets were providing an opening to be attacked. However, he issued a stern warning, hoping that this time, she wouldn't get her priorities wrong. The sharp rebuke struck her with force. Constance immediately dropped into a deep, prostrating bow, her voice filled with panic as she apologized profusely. She swore that next time, she would surely meet his expectations. He watched her bowed form with a detached air, one finger resting on his chin. He simply stated that he would wait, but without expecting much. His dismissive words echoed in her mind, triggering a flood of memories. Constance reflected on why she was doing any of this. She had been born to a distinguished family, beautiful and brilliant, destined to be the crown princess. That was supposed to have been her path, but instead, her fate was tied to the one she considered the good-for-nothing second prince. It was all over. The memory sharpened, focusing on her childhood resentment. The position she had desperately wanted, that of the first prince's fiancée, belonged to another, a stuck-up woman named Adrienne. She recalled that irritating woman with a scowl. For the sake of her family, however, she had reluctantly begun visiting the second prince to curry favor. She remembered introducing herself to the young prince, her voice polite but strained. Her memory of that first meeting was vivid. From that very moment, she had felt it, an unsettling, inexplicable sense that something about Prince Jeremy was profoundly off. She recalled his emotionless, dark, murky eyes, and the black room filled with occult books and tools from her childhood memories. It was as if she were being swallowed by darkness, a feeling that overwhelmed her even as a young girl. During that time, her father had spoken with the king, expressing his delight that his daughter was growing close to Prince Jeremy. The king, in turn, was relieved that his reserved son had finally found someone he could trust. Despite their parents' hopes, an inexplicable fear kept her from defying the young prince. Before she knew it, a master-servant relationship had formed under the guise of their engagement. Then, one day, she heard news concerning Prince Edward. Back in the present, Jeremy scoffed at what he was reading, remarking that it was laughably stupid. His brother was apparently head over heels for some baron's daughter and intended to marry her. She was taken aback, immediately asking if His Majesty knew about this and fretting over what would happen to Lady Adrienne if the engagement was called off. Jeremy calmly replied that their father did not know, and he had no intention of telling him. He looked up at her with an unsettling smile, finding it unexpected that she was worried about Adrienne. He had thought she would be happy, reasoning that if those two were to fall from grace, she would get what she had always wanted. Constance froze, realizing with a jolt of fear that he could see right through her. She affirmed to herself that this man was terrifying. Yet, his words echoed in her mind. If Edward and his fiancée were to disappear, Prince Jeremy would become the next in line for the throne, and her dream of becoming queen would finally be attainable. After that conversation, she had worked tirelessly to bring about their downfall. She reported to Jeremy that spreading bad rumors about Adrienne was going well, but admitted that the department store incident had been rushed. She confessed her greed, wanting to leave even a small scar on Adrienne's face, and acknowledged that hiring low-level demons was a mistake. As she spoke, she wondered what Prince Jeremy was truly thinking, as he didn't seem interested in the throne. She speculated that it might be more about getting back at Prince Edward. Jeremy, however, simply stated that whatever the case, he would get what he wants. He had just finished speaking when Constance's attention was suddenly drawn to a stack of books. A large, dark spider sat motionless upon the topmost volume, and her eyes widened in alarm. She recoiled with a startled cry, but he remained calm, his expression hardening with suspicion. He recognized it immediately, not a simple arachnid, but a magical bug designed for eavesdropping. He quietly wondered who could have planted it. His mind raced, quickly identifying the culprit, the maid who had served their tea just moments before. It had to be her. With a sudden surge of urgency, he thrust his hand forward, shouting for the guards to seize the intruder. His command echoed just as the maid, Elena, was making her way down the corridor. She stopped, realizing instantly that she had been discovered. Back in the study, Constance could only stare, stunned by the abrupt turn of events. Having been found out, Elena shed her disguise in a flash. Now clad in a dark, practical combat uniform, she stood poised on a high stone ledge, ready to make her escape. She launched herself into the night, leaping across the rooftops with silent, practiced grace as shouts of "Intruder" and "Don't let her escape" erupted from the guards on the ground below. She landed softly in a darkened garden, initially thinking the security was surprisingly lax. Her assessment was premature. She sensed a presence nearby and realized there was a watchdog. From the shadows, the beast emerged. It was no ordinary canine, but a monstrous, two-headed creature with glowing eyes and bared fangs. It let out a low, menacing growl as Elena watched, her expression turning serious. She faced the creature without flinching, drawing a short blade. Acknowledging her opponent was quite formidable, she spoke aloud to her absent master, requesting a reward for her safe return at dawn, an all-you-can-eat feast of pork and a cake piled high with cream. With her arms and face bandaged, Elena stands before Roland, a young woman with short hair and an older butler. She formally concludes her investigation report on the circle surrounding second Prince Jeremy, her expression serious. He expresses immense relief, admitting his heart nearly stopped when he heard she was seriously injured. He urges her not to push herself. Bowing deeply, Elena gratefully accepts his offer of an all-you-can-eat pork and cake dinner, promising to enjoy her leisure later. The butler observes that the palace security must have declined. Elena confirms it was surprisingly lax, making her infiltration relatively easy. However, she recounts a critical moment, when the guard dog, a monstrous creature called Cerberus, seized her arm in its jaws. She explains that she managed to shake the beast off thanks to the comb Roland had given her, which shattered in the process. The memory shows her fending off the two-headed hound as the comb emits a protective light. Back in the present, she expresses deep regret over her carelessness, but is relieved that it was only the comb that was destroyed. He dismisses her apology, thanking her for her hard work and promising to give her a new one. Overcome with emotion, Elena expresses her gratitude for such happiness, while the short-haired girl voices her relief that Elena is safe. Roland then shifts the conversation, focusing on what they have learned from the mission. The findings are stark. Prince Jeremy has been secretly plotting his elder brother's downfall, using his own fiancée, Lady Constance, as his operative. Elena clarifies that Lady Adrian was merely caught up in their scheme, and that those involved naively believe Jeremy and Constance's relationship is genuine, a perception Jeremy exploits. The short-haired girl admits she suspected Constance's feelings toward Adrian, but never imagined her wickedness was so profound. Roland adds that no one would suspect a plot involving the prince's own fiancée. Elena elaborates that Constance seems more fixated on the status of being the first prince's fiancée than on Adrian herself. The girl realizes that if the first prince falls, the second prince becomes heir, and Constance would become queen, a frightening prospect born of jealousy. It reflects that since the two brothers have never gotten along, it's no surprise Jeremy would seek an opportunity to rebel. Knowing his brother Edward was infatuated with another woman presented the perfect chance. Elena adds that while the people have restrained Edward's recklessness, now is the time for Roland's allies to strike, armed with evidence of terrible deeds. Roland deduces that from Jeremy and Constance's point of view, the annulment of the engagement is the perfect opportunity to bring down both Prince Edward and Lady Adrian simultaneously. The short-haired girl raises a critical concern. Their plan could inadvertently harm Lady Crystal, meaning they must arrange for her protection as well. She expresses her shock that Prince Jeremy was behind the recent department store incident, feeling it's an extreme measure even for Constance's grudge. Elena concurs, questioning the logic of the robbers' actions. She points out that if their goal was to target Lady Adrian, taking hostages and proclaiming an ideology were unnecessarily conspicuous moves. She continued her report, speculating that the demon's involvement wasn't part of Prince Jeremy's instructions. Elena believes that demons dissatisfied with the current pacifist demon lord may have used the commotion to act on their own. Hearing this, the butler mused that the young Master Roland saw on his way to the incident might not have been a mistake after all. His words sparked a connection in Roland's mind. He questioned if a certain Lord Dominic was also involved, theorizing that Lady Constance hired demons to attack the department store specifically to target Lady Adrian. He reasoned the plan had multiple layers to obscure the true client. As he considered this, he recalled a key fact. The owner of the department store is the family of Dominic's own fiancée, Lady Edith. As he laid out the possibility, a sudden understanding dawned on Elena. Roland pressed further, asking what Dominic's goal regarding his fiancée could be. Elena realized the answer. He wanted to break off the engagement. She explained that if a department store were to cause a major scandal, Dominic would have legal grounds to end the betrothal. Even if he didn't know the full extent of the plan, he could have secretly supported the robbers with security information. He agreed, adding that this theory would explain why Lord Dominic was seen walking alone that day, and, more importantly, how the robbers managed to infiltrate the high-security elevator hall that Lady Adrian was using so precisely. Roland concluded with concern that they had been too focused on Prince Edward's movements, realizing he wasn't the only noble plotting to break off an engagement. This realization about multiple plots cast a shadow over another group, the talented young men infatuated with Crystal. A grim thought surfaced. There was no guarantee that others among them wouldn't attempt similar schemes in the future. The mounting complexity of the situation weighed on Roland, his expression turning grim. Observing him, Elena stated plainly that they did not have the luxury of time. Acknowledging their lack of time, the group settled in to formulate their next move. Elena began by outlining her original plan: to monitor Prince Edward, prevent him from losing control, gather information, and ultimately seek the king's judgment. However, she pointed out the critical flaw in this approach. If it led to the first prince being disinherited, Prince Jeremy would simply move up in the line of succession. Her summary prompted the short-haired girl to reflect on Prince Jeremy's scheming. She laid out the dire state of the royal succession. The first prince is love-struck and lacks kingly qualities. The second prince has severe personality issues and acts on personal grudges, and a woman cannot inherit the throne. The butler added his concern that this situation could create significant confusion over the next royal successor. She continued her analysis, pointing to a historical precedent where, after the direct royal family members died, a duke with a close bloodline was matched with the one remaining unmarried princess, making him the nominal king. She suggested that, following this precedent, they might try to match Roland with the unmarried princess Rosaline. Elena reluctantly agreed, though she expressed her distaste for the idea. She concluded that if they reported the situation carelessly, the current royal family would be in an unfavorable checkmate, especially since Princess Rosaline is widely known as Roland's stalker. Elena then raised an even more troubling point. Prince Edward's plan to cancel his engagement is progressing quietly, under the surface. The butler voiced his fear that the king, out of love for his son, might ignore a fair judgment. He worried the king would move to eliminate Lady Adrian by pinning false charges on her, lamenting that the king's past indulgence had led to this very crisis. As he spoke, Roland's expression hardened, his fist clenching with resolve. He considered the precariousness of their position. Princess Rosaline warned that if they brought this matter to the king, Lady Adrian would be completely isolated, with the entire country turned against her. Roland agreed, concluding it was best to keep their findings confidential until they could gather enough evidence to prove Adrian's innocence and counter any potential accusations. He searched his mind for a brilliant method that could resolve everything quickly. As if on cue, Elena struck a pose, suggesting she had an idea. A sense of dread washed over him. The creaking sound of fate seemed louder than usual, warning that a wrong choice could lead to a terrible outcome. Then a thought struck him. The short-haired girl with X-clips in her hair announced she had a method that would solve all their problems quite simply. When Roland asked what it was, Princess Rosaline explained the kingdom's custom. If the current royal family is deemed useless, a new king is selected from the extended royal line, which includes the ducal houses. She specified that in such a scenario, the Girardier family, to which Lady Adrian belongs, has the closest bloodline, giving them the strongest claim. The full weight of her words settled upon him. He voiced the startling conclusion aloud. Lady Adrian could become queen, and consequently, he, as her brother-in-law, could become king. He stood stunned by the implication. Elena, however, confirmed that the option certainly exists, regardless of its feasibility. The butler beside her seemed to concur, while the short-haired girl chirped her agreement. He immediately dismissed the idea as absurd, arguing that it was tantamount to usurping the throne and shouldn't even be joked about. The short-haired girl's expression hardened. She countered that their first priority must be the safety of their territory and the people who support the Oriole family. If the royal family becomes an obstacle to that, she declared, it is their duty to protect their own. Elena questioned his pessimism, wondering aloud why becoming king, a dream for most men involving luxury and a harem, was something he opposed. The short-haired girl seemed to agree. Elena then playfully added that if he were to become king, he should consider her for his concubine, suggesting that the fourth position would be ideal, not carrying too much pressure. He recoiled at the suggestion, declaring that as a law-abiding citizen, he could not commit such a reckless act as arbitrarily claiming the throne while a proper royal family still existed. Sighing, he told them not to get ahead of themselves. The short-haired girl conceded his point about following the law, but quickly added that there are loopholes, reminding him of the historical precedent where a man who married a princess became the nominal king. She pressed on, stating it was legally possible to become king without being a prince. Flustered, he admitted the fundamental problem. He had no personal desire for the throne. Elena then posed a sharp question. Should the country's future be entrusted to the foolish first prince or the rebellious second prince? The butler's eyes widened in surprise. Roland could only stammer that surely there were more suitable candidates than him. The short-haired girl chided him for overthinking, insisting the throne was falling into his lap, and he should simply consider it an option. Elena agreed, calling him an indecisive hero, as always. Internally, Roland despaired, feeling that everyone was treating this monumental decision as if it were not their problem, urging him to simply resign himself to this unexpected fate. He looked up, his expression pleading as he began to object. Even if you say that. But the truth remained. The supposed hero chosen by the divine sword was, deep down, surprisingly cautious and timid. This internal conflict manifested as two figures seated back to back. The present-day Roland, pensive and burdened, and his younger self, withdrawn and sullen. Roland Valerie Oriole recalls his past, beginning with the ridiculously large holy sword he was given as a child. The moment he first held it, the weapon felt like a natural extension of his own body, and in that instant he understood with absolute certainty that he was the one chosen by the blade. This immense power, however, seemed to have no place in the peaceful world he lived in, where the epic battle between the hero and the demon lord was nothing more than an old tale. He never had to use the holy sword, Belgrand, until the day Prince Edward was attacked by assassins. Standing by the prince's side, Roland instantly summoned the weapon to defend it. In response to the threat, he moved without hesitation. In a single, blinding flash of steel and light, he wiped out every single one of the assailants, leaving their bodies strewn across the cobblestones. The prince, unharmed, was ecstatic. He praised Roland's amazing power, calling him his true right-hand man. At the time, Roland felt only relief, glad that he had been able to save his highness. But the elation of saving his friend did not last. He soon found himself standing alone before a closed door, the weight of his actions beginning to settle upon him. Later, he knelt on the floor, staring at his own hands. A profound terror washed over him as he realized the sheer destructive force he possessed, a power that could so easily extinguish human lives. His troubled thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling him brother-in-law. He looked up to see a young girl named Renee standing in the doorway. She stepped closer, her expression unreadable, and asked him a simple yet profound question. What did he wish to achieve with that power? Her question echoed in his mind, bringing forth another memory. He recalled a conversation with a young Jeremy, who stated his ambition plainly, to become engaged to Lady Adrian and, through that union, legally become king. As these memories coalesced, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps suspicion, crossed Roland's face. He expresses his exhaustion with the current topic, but Renee insists that this is where their work truly begins. She reminds him that he was completely beaten at the department store, and their biggest challenge now is to convey his good qualities to his highness. He counters earnestly, reminding them that their original goal was to awaken the prince and protect Lady Adrian from an unjust engagement cancellation. He feels their methods have deviated too far from that initial purpose. In response, Elena waves a hand dismissively, proposing a simpler solution. She identifies the love-struck prince as the root of all their problems and suggests that if they get rid of him, Lady Adrian won't have to marry an idiot. Roland can only sigh at the suggestion. He immediately rejects the idea, stating that it's not that simple. He admits he can't even reconcile with Adrian, making an engagement absolutely impossible. He warns Elena not to even joke about such a thing. Renee then observes that while he is popular, he is remarkably passive when it comes to romance, which leads her to question if he might prefer men. Roland shouts his denial, but she presses on, reminding him of the time Prince Edward declared he wanted to make Roland his official wife. Seizing the opportunity, Elena interjects with a serious expression. She confirms that such rumors about the young master are indeed circulating, and that there is even a secret society selling items related to them. He is completely taken aback by this news. Stuttering, he asks what rumors and what secret society she could possibly be talking about, clearly hoping it's all a joke. Elena clarifies with unnerving precision. The organization is called the Secret Club /Ship Fujoshi Love Affairs. Confused by the unfamiliar terms, Roland can only repeat, the ship of the slasher. She explains that fujoshi are women who enjoy pairing gentlemen in their fantasies and creating romantic works about them. She specifies that in these circles, Roland is considered the top, the one who embraces, while Prince Edward is the bottom. An image of this very scenario flashes in his mind, and he cries out in horror. Elena concludes her report, revealing that the new business of this secret club is to create and secretly sell lewd illustrated books, or doujinshi, featuring the two of them. He can only stammer, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. His confusion is met with a frantic outburst from Elena, who insists that selling such things without permission is impossible. Renee, standing beside her, calmly agrees, stating that she also believes it to be impossible. He stammers his agreement, but Renee suddenly changes her tune. She declares that on this specific topic, she cannot agree with Elena at all. With fiery conviction, she proclaims that in the pairing of Roland and Prince Edward, Roland is definitely the bottom, a point on which she refuses to yield. His bewilderment is absolute as he stares blankly into the room where Renee now stands, pointing at him with unwavering certainty. He asks if the books are filled only with images, prompting a new debate. Elena argues that Roland is a beautiful confidant serving the prince, a depiction of true beauty. Renee passionately counters that if he is a beautiful confidant, then the proper course is for him to offer his entire being to the prince. The images presented to him show two conflicting personas, one with a cute appearance that supposedly makes even men propose, clearly meant to be loved. The other, a more assertive version, embodying the legendary hero who should be ready to embrace anyone. The debate escalates as the butler calmly pours tea. Renee, speaking with fervor, explains her interpretation. Roland knows the prince's heart and delves into his deepest sorrows, embracing them with both his heart and body. Her voice continues, graphically detailing how Roland's delicate body would receive the prince's excitement. The words cause Roland to tremble where he sits. The graphic descriptions become too much. He clamps his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut, wishing he had done so much earlier. Outside, the intensity of the conversation seems to have taken its toll on Elena, who leans against a pillar, looking suddenly flustered and overwhelmed. She turns back to Renee, declaring that their argument is endless and proposing they call a truce for now. In response, Renee quotes the legendary masked author, Christine Goda-sensei, explaining that such stories don't require a climax, conclusion, or even meaning. Elena clasps her hands to her chest with a look of pure contentment, agreeing that as long as the gentlemen they admire are united and happy, that is all that matters. Renee agrees, admitting she had forgotten something important. A small smile gives way to a sudden, wide-eyed realization. She marvels at the genius of Christine Sensei, who revolutionized the entire industry in just over a year by introducing the concepts of gentleman's secret hole and gentleman's secret juice. Elena affirms her sentiment. Roland, looking completely exhausted, tentatively raises a hand to ask if their discussion has concluded. The two women turn, momentarily confused about their original topic before recalling it was about the young master's engagement to Lady Adrian. Renee suggests they ignore Roland's wishes and begin their planning, but Roland laments that the conversation derailed because of his own cowardice. Elena then offers a shockingly simple solution: quickly dispose of both the first and second princes. The suggestion leaves Roland aghast. Renee cautions Elena against being too hasty. As Roland listens, the distinct sound of clicking gears begins to echo in his mind, like the inexorable countdown of a time bomb. Within the grounds of a grand academy, a young woman with long, light-colored hair named Crystal turns, her attention caught as someone calls her name. The one who called is Firmin Gregoire Renec, a young nobleman who asks if she would like to attend that evening's soiree. Addressing him as Lord Firmin, Crystal politely demurs, suggesting it would be presumptuous for someone like her to be there. He calls her name once more, his tone seemingly insistent as she stands before him in the arched courtyard. Before she can respond, another young man, Dominic Erhard Omash, approaches with an invitation for a voyage on his family's ship. Crystal expresses that it sounds wonderful, but declines, explaining she is promised to a magician. Almost immediately, an energetic third nobleman, Maximilian Firmin Chaminade, rushes up, inviting her to his domain's port city for a relaxing visit. He reacts with disappointment as she apologizes to Lord Maximilian, stating that she unfortunately cannot take an extended break. Her polite composure begins to crack, her eyes widening in distress as more voices call out her name. Her face flushes as she bows deeply, offering a sincere apology and explaining that she has an urgent matter she must attend to. With a final, hurried plea to be excused, she turns and flees down a long, vaulted corridor, clutching her satchel. Watching her departure from a distance are two other students. Adolphe Rainer Charpentier sighs, lamenting that he failed to invite her again. He remarks to his companion that she is completely different from the women who easily give in. His companion, Estelle Louis Barbastro, agrees, comparing her to a fairy who has descended upon their academy. The focus returns to Crystal Rita Chesty, her expression resolute as she walks on alone. As she passes by, two other female students watch with disdain. One whispers to the other that Crystal is approaching the young nobles again, accusing her of simply flirting because she has a pretty face. She walks through the grand halls of the academy, her mind replaying the cruel rumors that follow her, whispers of a seductress who lives a life of luxury at the expense of the men she charms. A heavy sigh escapes her lips. This unwanted attention and the resulting gossip leave her feeling utterly exhausted. She wonders to herself, how did her life ever come to this? The answer lies in a sudden, jarring event. One day, without warning, she regained all the memories of her past life. That moment of recollection struck as she gazed into a mirror. The reflection was not who she expected, and a jolt of recognition ran through her as she realized she was now Crystal. The name was instantly familiar. She was Crystal, the heroine from the popular Otome game, Rainbow Romanesque. Her initial reaction to this revelation had been one of pure ecstasy. To be reborn as the heroine of a romance game felt like she had finally won at life. But that feeling was fleeting. Now, the reality of her situation feels impossible. She recalls the game's plot. A commoner girl who must endure bullying from villainous characters while pursuing love, all to become the queen of a great nation. For a commoner like her, the stress of such a life would be fatal. She contrasts this with her pathetic past life, where she died in a bathtub due to an unhealthy, shut-in lifestyle. Even with a beautiful new appearance, her old self, a longtime otaku, remains. The hurdle of talking to handsome men without a screen as a barrier is simply too high. With this grim self-awareness, she makes a decision. Unsure if events will unfold exactly as they did in the original story, she resolves to preemptively avoid raising any of the game's plot-triggering flags. Her strategy is simple. For now, she must stay away from the Noble Academy and, more importantly, its main characters. If she has no contact with them, she reasons, then no flags can possibly be raised. Despite her resolve to avoid them, fate seemed to be manipulating events. Crystal found herself transferred to the Noble Academy, just as the game's script dictated. She tried to find a silver lining, reasoning that she should at least be content with being reborn with such a lovely face. That small comfort evaporated as she stood before the imposing academy building. A sense of dread washed over her, her eyes wide with anxiety as she questioned why this had to happen. Yet, she discovered an unexpected perk. Peeking through a window, she saw one of the handsome nobles and had to admit that observing them in person was, to put it mildly, amazing. Even the idiot prince, she conceded, had a very good face. A sly smile crept across her face as she formulated a plan. This situation wasn't so bad, she decided. As long as she didn't interact with them, being at the same school would be perfectly fine. She put her plan into action, admiring the handsome boys from a safe distance, while successfully making some new friends. As her friends discussed the unusual sight of Lord Dominic and Lord Roland together, Crystal felt a wave of relief. It seemed there were otaku in every world, and the thought calmed her nerves. Her initial worries about how things would turn out began to fade. This second life, she realized with a jolt of excitement, was actually super fun. It was the best, but just as she embraced this newfound joy, she turned a corner and collided with someone. Her eyes met those of a dark-haired young man, and both of them froze in surprise. He reached out a hand as they stood in the stone archway, the impact having nearly knocked a book from her grasp. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, the realization of who she had just run into crashed down on her. Her face contorted in absolute panic. The shock sent her stumbling backward, completely losing her balance. As she fell, the young man cried out a frantic apology, insisting that it was his fault. The young man, Roland, catches sight of a girl running away. The girl, Crystal, panics internally, recognizing him as a character from the game, Rainbow Romanesque. She's flustered by his appearance, thinking he's so cute up close that he's practically a beautiful girl. She recalls how dangerous that close call was. Her original plan was to avoid contact with any of the game's capture targets at all costs. However, her efforts backfired spectacularly. She kept encountering them everywhere, and soon, every single one had taken a liking to her and began to pursue her aggressively. With a heavy sigh, her thoughts returned to the present. She sits at a desk in a library, quill in hand, diligently working. Her mind wanders to the game's original plot, recalling how at the graduation party, the 7 rainbow nobles would break their engagements with their respective fiancés to pledge their love to the heroine. She grimaces at the thought. While such a dramatic ending might be acceptable in a game, she understands that in reality, it would be a political catastrophe that could destroy the entire country. And that isn't her only concern. She thinks about the so-called villainesses. The game only ever showed their unpleasant side, but here, they are real, kind people. It is only natural for them to be upset if their fiancés suddenly pursue another woman. The guilt of causing such pain would be unbearable. This is why she's been desperately trying to avoid triggering any romantic flags. Yet, everything has backfired. No matter her actions, everyone falls for her. The idea of someone developing such strong feelings after only a few meetings is terrifying now that it's a reality. However, among all the suitors, there was one exception. One person who, like the others, had shown interest at first, but then began to observe her from a distance with a more analytical gaze. That person was Roland Valerie Oriole. Crystal still doesn't understand why he alone suddenly cooled off toward her. Despite the mystery, she is grateful that at least one of her potential romantic entanglements has been resolved. Thanks to this, she can enjoy the solitude of a library. She reflects that the dull transcription job isn't popular, meaning the nobles won't venture into such a dusty place. It is, for her, a perfect hideout. She sat alone in the library, contemplating the difficult truth of her existence. Crystal was a noble in name only, the illegitimate daughter of a traveling dancer from a family that had bought its title 3 generations prior. With only minimal financial support, she was forced to take on transcription work simply to make ends meet. With a sigh, she decided that was enough of the tedious work for one day. Untying the ribbon from her hair, she shifted her focus to her true passion, thinking to herself, now then, I'll work on this next. Her eyes fell upon a sketch of a passionate embrace. It was a common saying that skills will save you, and she found it to be true. Though it was only a hobby, the sales from her art were not bad at all. More importantly, she knew there were readers eagerly waiting for her next piece. A bright smile lit up her face as she picked up her quill. She understood her true calling wasn't pursuing romance with handsome nobles, but creating for Christine Goda's new work. She found immense joy in using her mind and her pen to make gentlemen happy with each other in her stories. Her hand moved deftly, sketching the face of a blushing young man. As she looked at the drawing, a particular person served as her inspiration. Lord Roland? Huh. She mused quietly. The thought of him, however, sparked a sudden anxiety. She glanced out the window, a worried expression on her face. Could he have noticed her true identity? Or worse, the true nature of this world? She feared it might be possible for him, because he was, after all, the legendary Roland. 5 years ago, within the Demon Lord's autonomous territory, a young woman with horns and twin tails pointed directly at Roland. She identified him as the hero of the Divine Sword and pleaded with him to suppress an impending rebellion led by the Demon Grand Duke and his faction. Roland could only look on in surprise. She continued her explanation, stating that some demons still cling to outdated notions of pride and try to solve everything with force. Information had reached her that the Dorrance Demon Grand Duke's faction, the most radical among them, was planning a riot. She formally requested that Roland, as the hero, prevent this uprising before it could begin. He considered her words carefully. Addressing her as the 169th Demon Lord, Yami Onyankopon-sama, he questioned her request. He suggested that since it was a dispute among demons, it would be more appropriate for her to handle it directly. Roland pressed the point, mentioning that he had heard a demon lord coexisting with a hero should possess enough power to counter such threats on their own. He asked if her own strength wouldn't be sufficient. Yami seemed unimpressed by his lack of enthusiasm, remarking that a demon rebellion should be the perfect cue for a hero. Roland was left bewildered, wondering why the demon lord side was making such an argument. His gaze fell, a vision of blood-stained hands flashing before him. He admitted quietly that he would rather avoid unnecessary bloodshed, if at all possible. Yami acknowledged his point, agreeing that she could indeed stop the rebellion herself. However, she explained that if she, the demon lord, were to forcibly subdue her own subordinates, it could provoke further resentment from the radicals, potentially leading to even more rebellions in the future. She warned that such an outcome could lead to innocent bystanders shedding unnecessary blood. With a dismissive wave, she declared that she was not one of the old-fashioned demons who believed in suppressing others through brute force. Her tone shifted to one of modern pragmatism. Presenting a stack of money, she explained her preferred method, earning money and using it to keep people quiet, because in this age, justice belongs to those with wealth. She then informed Roland that she had already secured permission from the Great Temple of the Holy Faith. Her plan was to have him display an overwhelming power that could even stand against the Demon Lord, which she believed would be enough to pacify the rebels who were unaware of the Divine Sword hero's true strength. Leaning closer, she looked him in the eye and delivered her final point. Those with power, she stated, have a responsibility that comes with it. She then challenged him directly. Wasn't it time for him to use that power of his correctly? Her words resonated within him. Roland looked down at his hands, silently contemplating the nature of his own power. He considered the Demon Lord's question, his hands clasped before him. What did he truly wish to achieve with his power? After a moment of reflection, he looked up, his expression firm. He understood now. The Demon Lord Yami watched him, awaiting his answer. He declared his purpose with newfound clarity. If his power could help everyone live peacefully, then he would wield his sword. Yami beamed, praising this as the true spirit of the Divine Sword hero. She then gave him his charge, to deal with the Demon Grand Duke's faction quietly and discreetly, treating it as a state secret. She added that she hoped this would be the last time such an intervention was necessary. As he processed her instructions, she made an entirely different and far more personal proposition. She suggested that if he was worried, he should simply spend the rest of his life with her. With the hero and the Demon Lord allied, she reasoned, no one could oppose them, and they could create an even more peaceful world. Roland could only stare, utterly bewildered by the sudden turn. He quickly regained his composure and rejected her offer, explaining that such an alliance would only make the demons resent her for siding with the hero. Yami sighed in disappointment, muttering that it was boring, but that she would have to be patient. Her mood shifted in an instant, and seeing an opportunity, she asked if he could help her sort out some paperwork. When she presented the documents, he was taken aback. They were state secrets from his own country. He questioned if it was truly permissible for him to view them. Ignoring his concern, Yami simply asked if he could use an abacus. He confirmed that he could, and she expressed a relief. Her relief was born of frustration with her own people. She declared that all of her subordinates were useless muscleheads who couldn't even operate an abacus, making his presence all the more convenient. He picked up a ledger, a thought forming in his mind. Between the demon rebellion and now these documents, he mused that everyone's definition of what constituted a state secret was surprisingly arbitrary. Despite his reservations, he set to work, his fingers moving skillfully across the beads of the abacus. The memory of that time in the demon territory fades, giving way to a more recent past. 1 year ago in the royal capital, Roland stood on a busy street, now dressed in a fine suit. Beside him, Rene looked on with a similar expression of surprise. He and Rene are stopped in their tracks by a commotion. His maid, Elena, rushes out to meet him, calling him young master and pointing out the noise echoing through the streets. He turns, his expression shifting to one of concern as he tries to understand what is happening. As they take in the scene, Constance expresses her horror, explaining that it appears the behemoth from the sideshow has escaped. Rene, standing beside her, adds with urgency that if they don't act quickly, people might get hurt. Rene continues her assessment, noting that while the anti-monster security squad has been called, they probably won't make it in time. Roland listens, processing the dire implication of her words. His expression hardens with resolve. Seeing the frightened faces of his companions reflected in a shop window, he sighs, realizing he has no other choice. He decides he will go and stop the creature himself. He turns to give instructions, telling Elena to explain the situation to the sideshow owner. Rene wishes him luck, affectionately calling him brother-in-law. As he walks away, she remarks to Constance that it has been a while since he summoned the Divine Sword, not since he suppressed the Dorrance Grand Duke's rebellion. Meanwhile, in the path of the chaos, Elena guides Princess Rosaline through an alleyway, urging her to safety. Elsewhere, a woman identical to the princess runs through the street in terror, screaming for everyone to watch out and run away from the approaching danger. A memory surfaces of a rampaging behemoth, a monstrous horned beast with a broken collar, lunging forward with terrifying force. This event took place after Roland's engagement was annulled, and he was forced to confront the demon lord's forces. It was he who saved Princess Rosaline from the beast's rampage in the royal capital. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, his first concern was for her safety, asking if she was injured. The princess looked up at him, her expression a mixture of shock and recognition. Now, in the present, Prince Jeremy greets Roland at the entrance of a stately building, a bouquet of white roses in hand. He smiles warmly, expressing his gladness at Roland's arrival and welcoming him inside. As they walk down a lavishly decorated corridor, Jeremy mentions hearing that Roland had saved people with the divine sword. Roland apologizes for drawing attention to himself, explaining that his actions were merely on the spur of the moment. The prince quickly dismisses the apology, insisting there is no need for modesty. He tells Roland to be proud, for he acted as a true hero. Jeremy adds that he has heard of Roland's remarkable achievements from Rosaline and expresses his regret for the trouble she endured. He explains that he just happened to be there at the time, but the gossip magazines twisted the story. The incident, he notes with a weary expression, became an even bigger sensation than the subjugation of the behemoth itself, with headlines falsely reporting a holiday date between them. Jeremy reassures him not to worry, mentioning that Rosaline didn't seem to mind the articles at all. He then turns towards a closed door, announcing loudly that Rosaline has a visitor. From within, Rosaline's voice calls out Roland's name in sheer delight. She emerges, hands clasped and face beaming, exclaiming how much she's wanted to see him. Behind her, the walls of her room are covered with numerous framed portraits of Roland, a sight that leaves him momentarily speechless and unnerved. In a separate conversation, Jeremy recounts these events to Lord Dominic. He explains that after the incident, Rosaline became completely infatuated with Roland, leading Jeremy to believe a marriage was imminent. He concludes with a somber tone, however, revealing that Rosaline unfortunately fell ill soon after. Dominic listens, acknowledging that he has heard the concerning news. He explains to Roland that while Princess Rosaline seems fine to him, the doctors and the king have declared her unfit to receive visitors. Through a barred window, the princess can be seen, her hands pressed against the glass. Roland, standing beside the prince, asks if a decision is final. He confirms that it has been decided. The prince's mind drifts back to a recent triumph, recalling the announcement that Roland was the winner of the 20th Royal Capital Swordsmanship Tournament. He remembers praising Roland's excellent performance, celebrating his 4th consecutive victory and declaring him the absolute champion. A right-hand man he could be proud of anywhere. His memory shifts to a conversation with Lord Dominic, with Roland standing by. The prince had told Dominic that while he was an excellent man, his sword skills needed work and that he expected more from him next time. Dominic had apologized. The prince then laughed, remarking to Roland that it's impossible for anyone to stand a chance against the hero of the divine sword. He then asserts that it's perfectly fine, as those with power have the right to display it. Roland, however, walks alone down a grand corridor, sighing to himself. He wishes he could stop participating in the tournaments, even if it is the prince's desire. He knows the difference in power is too obvious. He always wins. He continues to mull over the situation, rubbing his head in frustration. He finds the nicknames he's been given, like the absolute champion Roland, embarrassing. He realizes the prince simply wants to show off how excellent his attendant is, viewing it as less conspicuous than Roland wielding his divine sword, Belgrand, around town. His thoughts are interrupted by Dominic, who approaches and congratulates him on his victory. Roland thanks him, but asks him to stop using that title. Dominic relays that the prince was very pleased, boasting about his excellent right-hand man. Roland acknowledges this, stating that it's good. Dominic grows pensive, wondering aloud what it would be like if he, too, had been born with overwhelming power far beyond that of ordinary people. The question catches Roland by surprise. As Roland walks away down the corridor, another young noble tells Dominic that the prince is waiting and he should hurry. He addresses Dominic, but his eyes are on Roland's retreating form as he calls him the hero of the divine sword. Prince Jeremy stands alone, his expression somber as he places a hand over his heart. He reflects on the nature of his own abilities, acknowledging that while he was born with his power, it is not a simple gift. He considers the burden that comes with it, realizing that possessing such strength is, in its own way, a significant challenge. Within a grand, sunlit hall, 3 small, bearded servants with pointed hats make their rounds, brooms in hand. One of them looks up, his expression brightening as he calls out a cheerful greeting to someone he refers to as Princess Edith. The person they greeted, Crystal, is seen outside in the lush greenery of a garden. She glances back over her shoulder with a gentle smile before continuing along a path near an ornate building. Returning inside, she approaches the servants in the hallway and asks what they were doing in the garden. One of them explains that they were simply offering a greeting to the black dog. The servants elaborate on the creature, whispering of the fearsome black dog, a beast rumored to bring death to any who look upon it. They add that it used to sing with the pixies, but has become perpetually gloomy. Hearing this, Crystal covers her mouth, unable to suppress a light chuckle. She explains that the vast academy grounds are filled with such historical sites, making a precious place where one can see untamed demons and pixies. She speaks fondly of the house pixies, who are said to bring happiness to the mansion's visitors, and expresses her sincere gratitude for how they keep the academy so beautiful with their daily cleaning. Her kind words clearly touch the servants, one of whom declares that she is a truly good girl. He laments that the only others who pay them any mind are rich students merely showing off, as well as, he trails off, mentioning the princess and the Oriole family. The name causes Crystal's gentle demeanor to vanish, replaced by a sharp, focused concern. The Oriole family, everyone, she asks quietly, her eyes wide. Her sudden shift in tone leaves the servants bewildered. They exchange confused glances, uncertain how to respond to her intensity. Gathering around her, they ask what is wrong. Crystal looks down, a troubling realization dawning on her as she murmurs, "What is this?" One servant offers that they might be mistaken, as they hadn't noticed anything unusual the previous morning. As Crystal resolves to investigate just in case, her thoughts are suddenly pierced by a sharp memory. The stern face of Prince Edward as she insists, "It's a misunderstanding, Lord Edward." Her troubling memory was interrupted by a commotion on the grand staircase. She sat on the steps, surrounded by the concerned dwarven servants, as a group of students led by Lord Dominic and Maximilian confronted two young women. Maximilian pointed accusingly at the two, calling them unsightly. The young women, Edith and her friend, looked shocked, insisting they hadn't looked down on anyone and that it was all a misunderstanding. Lord Dominic then stepped forward, dismissing their pleas. He stated coldly that they were at the scene of an incident the day before, a fact confirmed by multiple eyewitnesses. He demanded they admit their guilt and accept their punishment, questioning if they intended to make excuses. Edith protested that they had done nothing and begged him to listen. He turned his back on her, prompting a desperate cry of his name from Edith. As Dominic walked away down the hall, Edith muttered to herself in frustration. She found it creepy to be associated with the good-for-nothing prince, and recalled that Dominic was the younger brother of the prince's former fiancée. The dwarven servants, having observed the exchange, quietly advised her that while ignoring a fiancé was one thing, she should seriously reconsider her choice of marriage partner. Elsewhere on the academy grounds, Roland, Valerie, Oriole, and Renee noticed the commotion as Edith stormed past them. Roland watched her go, wondering what could have happened. Her angry stride was interrupted when two other students bowed respectfully, greeting both her and Renee by name. From a distance, Roland identified the young woman as Edith, the daughter of the owner of the Raspale department store and Lord Dominic's fiancée. He then glanced at Renee, seemingly pondering her connection to the situation. He approached with a gentle smile and introduced himself as Roland Valerie Oriole, thanking Edith for always looking after his younger sister. Edith froze, her face flushing in shock, as Renee peeked out from behind her with wide, surprised eyes. He continues the conversation, noting that Lady Edith is from a studious family with a deep knowledge of monsters and illusions. He muses aloud that actually meeting a demon lord or a dragon might change his own impressions. His sister, Renee, interrupts, calling out his name and asking him to listen to her. Edith, however, leans forward eagerly, her eyes sparkling. She asks if it's true that he is the divine sword hero, Roland, and confesses that she has always wanted to speak with him. He observes that she truly seems to have a passion for monsters and illusions. Edith beams, confirming with an enthusiastic yes. The pleasant moment is broken by the arrival of the maid, Elena. She addresses Edith, remarking on her youthful naivety and her apparent belief that she could simply charm the Demon King. While acknowledging Edith's cleverness, Elena's tone shifts as she pointedly asks why she would treat Lord Dominic in such a manner. At the mention of his name, Edith remembers Lord Dominic. She turns to the others and asks if they recall the incident from the day before. Roland and Renee exchange a confused glance, asking what she is referring to. She begins to recount the events. Yesterday afternoon, Baroness Crystal had apparently fallen down a flight of stairs. Edith recalls the scene, expressing her concern over Crystal's injuries and wondering if she was all right. Roland, alarmed, presses for more information, asking what happened. As Edith hesitates, her expression troubled, Renee wonders aloud if this has something to do with Lord Dominic, but Edith quickly dismisses the idea. Despite her denial, she continues her explanation. She admits she doesn't know all the details, but she learned from a friend of Adrienne's who was there that Prince Edward had taken Crystal away, accusing her of being the one who pushed her. The revelation hits them with the force of a physical blow. Roland, Renee, and Edith's friend stare in disbelief, their mouths agape. Roland shouts in astonishment, unable to process the accusation. Within the academy grounds, Lady Edith examines a tuft of dark fur with her friends. She remarks that while finding animal fur isn't unusual, she has never seen anything like this before. Renee leans in, asking if it is indeed some kind of fur. Nearby, Elena reports her findings after consulting with the dwarven servants, who are busy sweeping the stairs. She explains that the house pixies saw nothing, but notes that while the size is different, the texture feels similar to the fur of the Cerberus they once fought. The revelation causes Renee to exclaim in shock, "Cerberus!" She looks at Elena with wide, sparkling eyes, impressed that a maid serving the Oriole family has directly battled a demon. Lady Edith apologizes for the digression and arranges to speak with Elena again later. Returning to the matter at hand, she voices her own suspicion that the fur belongs to a demon, picturing a monstrous black canine with glowing eyes. She explains that while some harmless demons reside on campus, they can occasionally show their fangs. Elsewhere, Lord Maximilian stands alone, lost in thought. He reflects on the fact that he has seen no trace of demons since the transfer incident, when a sudden realization strikes him with the force of grinding gears. He whirls around to face Lady Edith and her friends, exclaiming loudly. He asks Edith if she can identify the true nature of the fur and scales, to which she confidently replies that she can. She tells him they can find answers in the school library and urges him to go with all speed. As he turns to leave, she adds that she has an urgent task for Renee and Elena as well. The urgency of the situation triggers a painful memory for Maximilian. He recalls Prince Edward berating him in a grand hall, shouting that he had no right to protect a lady without considering the circumstances and that he did not want to hear his opinion. Maximilian remembers his own feeling of powerlessness at that moment. The memory continues, focusing on Prince Edward's angry face as Crystal stands before him, defiantly calling out his name. The scene concludes from his perspective, standing alone at the bottom of a magnificent staircase, looking up at Prince Edward, Crystal, and their entire retinue assembled on the landing above. Inside a grand hall, Roland Valerie Oriole ascends a staircase, where he is greeted by Adolphe. The blonde noble cheerfully remarks that Roland isn't late, prompting a confused Roland to ask if he'd heard from Dominic about their meeting. He repeats Dominic's name, still puzzled. Nearby, Furman turns away with a dismissive click of his tongue. A faint smile touches Roland's lips as understanding dawns on him. He realizes that Dominic must have deliberately neglected to contact him. Adolphe, however, maintains a friendly facade, apologizing and suggesting their messages must have simply gotten crossed. He then adds that since Roland is here, he has a favor to ask concerning that girl, gesturing towards Crystal. From a short distance away, Crystal watches the exchange, her expression unreadable as Roland and Adolphe converse. Her stoic demeanor shatters into pure rage. She internally seethes, realizing they deliberately arrived late to test her and are now deceiving Roland. Her outburst catches Roland by surprise, who recognizes the group as the prince's entourage. Despite her fury, Crystal resolves not to let them have their way. Seeing her silent struggle, Roland looks at her with a gentle, determined smile and declares firmly, "Because I am on your side." With a sharp-toothed grin, Lord Maximilian points forward, an air of confident command about him. Beside him, Roland Valerie Oriole observes with a more cautious, analytical expression, his hand resting thoughtfully on his chin. Roland turns to him, his voice laced with concern, asking if it's true that Crystal was pushed down the stairs. Maximilian lets out a boisterous laugh, dismissing the rumor and loudly declaring that it is indeed true. He then clarifies the situation to Crystal, explaining with a pained expression that he simply missed a few steps on the stairs and hurt his wrist in the fall. Leaning in, Crystal expresses her sympathy, remarking on how painful it must have been. Roland processes this new information, his features tight with worry. He thinks to himself that it was a big fuss over nothing, but feels a wave of relief that the injury wasn't serious. In the background, Maximilian announces he's taking the day off to be safe. His friend then turns back to him, offering a sincere apology. Maximilian explains that he should have mentioned what happened the day before, when they had only gone to see Crystal. Roland looks up, taken aback by the sudden apology. He quickly waves it off, insisting there's no need to apologize since Maximilian was just heading home. However, Maximilian's thoughts reveal a deeper reason. He had wanted to summon Roland, but couldn't bring himself to admit he was conducting a background check on Prince Jeremy. He explains to Roland and his other companions, Furman and Estel, that they had been acting on their own. They held the opinion that it was important to stop the culprit before the situation could escalate. Roland listens, his expression serious. In another part of the estate, Lord Dominic turns his head sharply, his gaze alert as if he's heard his name or sensed a shift in events. A flicker of understanding crosses Roland's face, followed by a subtle, determined smile. He realizes this course of action was Dominic's suggestion and resolves to proceed. Maximilian continues his explanation, admitting he was also worried about seeing one of his own subordinates apologize to someone. He remarks that it's a rare sight, though ultimately unimportant, and formally tells Roland he is forgiven. He declares that they have found the culprit who pushed Crystal. His finger points directly at Crystal's two friends, accusing them of being the villains. The two girls gasp in shock, while Crystal herself looks on with a steely gaze. Stepping forward, Crystal demands that he not use the word culprit so lightly. She asserts that her friends are the victims, forced to bear the weight of a false accusation. Maximilian retorts, shouting that they have testimony from Crystal herself that someone pushed her. Roland, however, looks on with a pensive expression, questioning if there is any other evidence. Maximilian, flustered, insists that someone must have done it, as it's impossible for it to have been a simple accident. He recalls the false information spread by Constance, which led everyone to believe that Adrian was routinely harassing Crystal. He realizes that the current situation is built on the premise that a culprit must exist, rather than the possibility that Crystal simply lost her footing. He continues his argument, stating that the moment Crystal fell, her two friends turned their backs and, with cruel smiles, ran away without offering any help. Crystal calmly interjects, correcting his account. She explains that she was the one who told them to go, as she needed them to call for help. She continues, stating that if they had forgotten to call for help, then she would apologize on their behalf. She acknowledges that due to the sudden accident, they were likely flustered. He listens to her defense, considering the details. She points out that while there were many witnesses, no one actually saw the moment she was pushed. He processes this, noting that the girls were at least 3 steps away from her when she fell. A slight smirk crosses his face as he questions if this means her friend's actions weren't malicious. Roland confronts Constance, his voice sharp with accusation. He states that there are ways to push someone from behind, even when separated, and if she intends to claim innocence, she must provide proof. Without an alibi, he declares, they will consider her the culprit. Constance is left speechless by the direct challenge. In response to his demand, Crystal steps forward. She counters that what he asks for is a demon's proof. It is impossible to prove that something did not happen. Roland glances back, listening to her objection. He dismisses her argument as flimsy, accusing her of using overwhelming power to force her point. Nearby, 2 other students whisper that Crystal's group seems unconcerned with Adrienne's guilt, focusing only on her presence at the scene. Constance then speaks up, insisting that no one has the right to blame her friends. Roland's eyes narrow, silently questioning if she truly intends to continue defying him. Beside him, Estelle observes the tense exchange. Suddenly, Estelle raises his hand, calling out, "Excuse me." His interruption catches everyone's attention, including a surprised Roland, who turns to ask what he is doing. He calmly explains that the student council president is considered a public figure, much like a teacher. Therefore, he posits, isn't it the student council's duty to investigate the cause of the transmigration accident and work to prevent a recurrence? A look of realization dawns on Roland's face. He exclaims that Estelle voiced his exact thoughts. Seizing the opportunity, he points at Crystal and declares that the students are in more danger than she realizes. As student council president, he asserts it is her responsibility to clarify the cause of the incident. He continues, outlining his strategy. He will use this official investigation to secure Adrienne's cooperation. His own role, he announces to the crowd, is to find the true culprit and bring forth the evidence, buying them all time. Crystal listens, processing the sudden shift in the situation. Turning to Estelle, Roland asks for his thoughts on the matter, given that he has just become the student council president. Estelle confirms a crucial detail. Crystal did indeed state that she was pushed by someone. The confirmation sparks an idea in Roland's mind. He realizes that if there was an impact on her back, there must be something that can substitute for an alibi. A confident smile spreads across his face as he declares that this is good. Now, they have a clear objective. Crystal watches him, her expression unreadable. He begins his investigation by directly questioning a witness, asking if something collided with the accused. His companion, Estelle, looks on, puzzled by the line of questioning. Meanwhile, Crystal recounts her version of events to her friends. She confirms that something did strike her, describing a black, hairy mass that fell from the ceiling, causing her friends to gasp in shock. Her testimony is met with immediate skepticism from Furman and the other student council members. He loudly dismisses it as just another excuse, demanding to know who would believe such a story. Crystal desperately insists she is telling the truth, explaining that she was trying to help, but the creature, a black mass with yellow eyes, seemed to laugh at them, filling her with terror. She continues, explaining that in her fear, she simply ran away. Acknowledging that it sounds like a bad dream, she maintains that it was real and that she had confided in someone about the incident. Roland, however, remains unconvinced. He scoffs at the notion of a monster, reasoning that such a creature would have caused a far greater disturbance. He pointedly asks if there is any proof of its existence. His skepticism is echoed by Furman, who sternly tells Crystal to stop her clumsy excuses and confess her crime. He warns that he will not allow her to waste any more of their time. Flustered, she and her friends can only offer apologies. Just as the confrontation reaches a peak, a new voice cuts through the tension. Lady Edith ascends the grand staircase, calling out for them to wait. Her sudden appearance startles Furman. Edith declares that she has testimony to offer. Roland turns to her with a knowing smile, asking what this is all about before confidently stating that now, it is their turn to act. Lady Edith approaches Roland, thanking him for speaking up and acknowledging that his words were a great help. Roland, however, is lost in thought, wondering how Adrienne could have found out so quickly. He surmises that Lady Raspade must have informed her, and feels a sense of relief that they seem to have made it in time. Nearby, Furman and his companions confront Lord Dominic. Furman angrily demands to know why Dominic, as Adrienne's fiancé, failed to say a single word in her defense. Maximilian agrees, calling his silence a disgrace. Dominic averts his gaze, sweating and unable to offer a response. Edith steps forward, addressing Prince Edward's followers and declaring her intent to present evidence on their behalf. She turns to Roland, referencing his earlier mention of a prankster, and holds up a small glass vial. She announces that she will show him if there truly is one. Roland and the others stare at the vial in her hand. He asks what it is, his expression skeptical as he wonders aloud if it's merely trash. Furman's gaze hardens as he demands to know what Lady Raspade is holding. Edith meets his stare with a determined look of her own. Roland also presses her for an answer, asking what is inside the vial. She explains that it's something she had the house pixies retrieve that morning. After an investigation, she discovered it was a tuft of gremlin fur. Furman reacts with shock, repeating the word gremlin. He questions why such a creature would be in the front garden, concluding it must be part of some prank. Roland, overhearing the exchange, admits he has never heard of a gremlin. He notes that what Lady Edith possesses isn't something he can use as a substitute and briefly considers the second prince's potential involvement. He then states authoritatively that gremlins are creatures known for their love of playing pranks on people, surprising Edith and Furman. She elaborates on the creature's appearance, describing it as a medium-sized, dog-like being that primarily inhabits the northern regions. Its key features, she explains, are its large, yellow eyes and shaggy fur. Roland and the others listen, absorbing the details. Edith continues, clarifying that while this isn't a formal meeting with the Saratobi clan, she is acting as an assistant. She admits that Lady Raspade is exceptionally talented and that she feels a bit intimidated by the grand stage that has been set for these events. Roland internalizes the new information. He understands that the existence of a gremlin isn't the core issue. The real problem is why such a creature is at the academy. He begins to question the evidence itself, wondering when and where it was dropped and whether it can truly be considered proof of anything. He looks up the grand staircase to see Lady Edith, who asks why everyone is gathered. She explains that she had requested a witness be brought to her. She clarifies with a bright smile that she had just met with the house pixies. It was a fortunate coincidence, as she was about to escort them to a classroom. Roland greets the small, bearded figures warmly. One of the pixies greets him back familiarly, calling him Oriole's brat and noting it has been some time. Nearby, Maximilian mutters about the foolish prince's gathering. He then asks for a moment of their time for an important matter. From the top of the stairs, the rest of the group thanks the pixies for their trouble. Holding up the vial of gremlin fur, he explains that Lady Edith claims to have collected the black fur from the East Wing just that morning. He asks the pixies if they know anything about it. The pixies immediately corroborate the story. One confirms that Lady Edith collected the fur that morning, and another adds that they were with her during the cleaning, leaving no room for doubt. Roland then asks if, in all their time cleaning the school daily, they have ever seen this fur before. One of the pixies answers definitively. They have never seen it before, and it was not there during the previous day's cleaning. The implication dawns on Roland. The fur appeared sometime between yesterday and this morning. His thoughts are cut short as a voice calls out his name. The interruption comes from Maximilian, who steps forward with an accusatory expression. He questions why Lady Edith is colluding with both Adrian and the house pixies, suggesting they are merely coordinating their testimonies. He presses his point, declaring that the word of a commoner is inherently untrustworthy, and that the pixies are nothing more than servants whose words carry no weight. The accusation stuns Roland and his companions, but it ignites the fury of the pixies, who roar in protest at the insult to their honor and diligent work. Unmoved, Maximilian glares down at them with utter disdain. He declares that he has always found their attitude displeasing and delivers a chilling threat. He will ensure the house pixies are banished from his family's estate forever, warning them not to underestimate the reach of his connections. He stood firm, his expression hardening with resolve after his declaration. Behind him, Roland and the others could only watch, their faces a mixture of shock and apprehension at the sudden escalation. Among a group of students, Lord Dominic explains the nature of the house pixies. He states that they bring wealth and fortune to the houses they inhabit, which is why the upper-class families in the academy pay them handsomely. Conversely, he adds, families that are looked down upon by the pixies are said to fall into ruin. Hearing this, Roland and the others grow concerned, with one student asking what they should do if the pixies were to leave. Their discussion continues, with one student noting that this is precisely why everyone, from the highest to the lowest ranks, is currently trying to curry their favor. The conversation is cut short when Lord Dominic points an accusatory finger at Roland. He declares that the Oriole ducal house is among those vying for the pixies' favor, and since Roland is their comrade, it's only natural. His expression twists into a sneer as he accuses Roland of trying to get a head start on everyone else. As he speaks, the house pixies mutter amongst themselves, one complaining that Dominic is being rude and forgetting his manners. The other agrees, suggesting they should have a talk with the Oriole family's own pixies. Their displeasure is palpable, but Roland remains composed, calmly stating that he is different from them, that he is special. Dominic smirks at this, mockingly questioning if Roland is receiving special treatment again and calling him hero. He continues his tirade, his voice rising with frustration. He admits that he doesn't want to have to think about Roland, yet he is constantly forced to. His face contorts with genuine distress. His outburst trails off, and Roland's gaze remains steady. He reflects that while Dominic seems to desperately crave being special, it's not something he himself feels. His quiet reflection is interrupted by a new voice. Yami appears, explaining that power holds the potential for violence, and that a tragedy born from it should never have occurred. She is embodying words once spoken to a child by a demon. Below, Dominic elaborates on this philosophy to a confused Roland, stating that those who only see power as a tool for violence are unworthy of it. Before Roland can answer, Dominic erupts into a wild, triumphant laugh. He declares that he has been telling his father all along that fawning over the house pixies is a foolish expense. He proclaims that the happiness they bring is unnecessary and, with a grand gesture, shouts for them to get out. His command echoes through the hall. In a surprising turn, Roland and the other students shout their agreement in unison, declaring that Dominic is right. They proclaim his stance is magnificent and that they have no need for the power of the house pixies. The dismissed house pixies trudge away, muttering amongst themselves. They lament their foolishness, now uncertain of their fate. Roland remarks to Lord Dominic that his actions were perhaps too flashy. Unconcerned, Dominic raises his arms in a celebratory gesture, explaining that having the pixies seen with the royal family would only cause public anxiety. He confidently states he will take full responsibility for the matter. He then pauses, deciding to refocus the conversation and organize the facts. He mentally recounts the key events: the young lady's inexplicable fall, the appearance of a black and yellow creature, and the demonic traces collected. Putting the pieces together, he concludes that the culprit is a gremlin, a monster known for tripping people for its own amusement. As he speaks, Crystal turns to Roland with a serious expression. She states that based on what she has heard from his capable right-hand man, she is inclined to agree with the assessment. Roland's eyes widen in surprise at her words. His reaction is cut short by an angry shout from Prince Edward. He dismisses the idea of animal hair being the cause and furiously questions their new theory that a gremlin was responsible for Lady Crystal's fall. He then turns his accusation towards Adrian, demanding to know why such a creature would be brought to this place. As if on cue, Elena appears at the top of the grand staircase. Held firmly in her grasp is a small, dark, impish creature. She calmly announces to the stunned onlookers that she has brought the gremlin. A man in a simple cap seethes with rage, shouting at Hornman. He curses him, questioning what kind of divine revelation this is, and vowing that he will never be forgiven. He furiously promises to repay the debt owed to the department store. His outburst is ignored by the Hornman's associates. A demon with a third eye remarks on the pettiness of using a young girl for their work, expressing surprise that the brat even showed up. Their leader, a large man in a helmet, sees it as a perfect opportunity. He declares that if they can defeat the hero, their names will be known throughout the demon tribe. The leader's boastful words echo, reaching Roland. He listens with a grim expression, thinking to himself that defeating a true hero is not such a simple task. His mind drifts back to a traumatic memory. He was a transmigrator in a strange land, watching as the department store was attacked. He recalls being just a bystander, unable to fight back as chaos erupted around a shocked man in a top hat. He remembers being utterly annihilated without anyone laying a finger on him. At the time, he didn't understand what had happened, but now, with clarity, he realizes the man at the center of that incident was a fake hero. This realization brings back other memories. Facing the last vestiges of the demon tribe's power, a monstrous beast wreathed in shadow. He had been naive about the hero's power. The scene shifts back to the present, revealing that the thugs captured at the department store were given a chance at redemption through a new mission. The thug leader recalls the mission's parameters, identical to a previous request from his employer: target the silver-haired and red-haired women. His demonic familiar has already captured one, but he turns to his subordinates, angrily demanding to know why the red-haired woman is still at large. He orders them to retrieve the plan and get moving. He privately muses that his employer seems to hold a particular grudge against the red-haired woman. He briefly wonders if it's a matter of a woman's scorn before dismissing the thought as irrelevant. His mind continues to work. While they were targeting the department store, he realizes that if he can successfully capture the red-haired woman as requested, he might be able to negotiate directly with his employer. Suddenly, the plotting is interrupted. Elena appears, holding a small, imp-like gremlin by the scruff of its neck. "Gremlin, I've brought him," she announces calmly. She holds the captured gremlin aloft for all to see. With a bright smile, Elena announces to the assembled students that she has successfully apprehended a demon that had infiltrated the academy. The other young women, including Crystal, gasp in shock. The red-haired woman looks on with a serious expression, asking for confirmation that the creature is indeed a gremlin. The red-haired woman then asks if they are to acknowledge that this creature's presence is the cause of the recent incident. Before anyone can answer, Lord Dominic shouts for them to wait, directing his plea toward Prince Edward, who stands watching the scene unfold with a cool demeanor. Roland remains nearby, his expression tense. The other young lords quickly voice their skepticism. Dominic questions if the creature is truly a gremlin, suggesting it looks more like a monkey from the south. Furman agrees, dismissing it as a pet that likely escaped. Maximilian takes it a step further, accusing Adrienne's faction of planting the creature as part of scheme. Throughout their protests, Elena simply holds the gremlin, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Cutting through the noise, Crystal raises a finger and declares that the truth of the matter will be revealed once her brother is on the scene. Roland watches her speak, while Edward's eyes widen slightly as he murmurs the words, "divine relic." She explains that her brother is a wielder of a divine relic, a weapon that unleashes divine power to smite demons. Therefore, she proposes a test by the relic will serve as undeniable proof. If the creature is demonic, the relic will react. Elena looks on, pleased with this development. With a grim expression, Edward agrees to the proposal. He turns to Roland and grants him permission to summon the divine relic. He then addresses the red-haired and silver-haired women, asking if this course of action is acceptable to them. He states his intent to make it clear, just as they wished, whether or not they are lying. The red-haired woman expresses her surprise, questioning how a divine relic, meant to be dedicated to the great shrine, could be summoned with only the prince's permission. As she speaks, the massive, ornate weapon materializes in the hall. Crystal proudly explains that her brother and the relic are one, allowing him to summon it anywhere, at any time. Roland stands beside his weapon, ready. Her eyes widen in utter disbelief as she breathes a single, astonished word. Amazing. She watched him, fascinated, explaining that she was so curious about the hero's divine relic summoning that she had to investigate. Roland, looking slightly flustered, replied that since a demon's hair possesses divine power, they should just get a sample from the gremlin as evidence and then evacuate it from the school grounds. He then turned to Elena, who stood on the grand staircase, and asked if she could handle it. She affirmed that she could. She descended the stairs, the captive gremlin now in view behind her, while pulling out a freshly bought handkerchief. Approaching the group of students, Elena politely apologized for the interruption and asked if anyone could lend her a handkerchief. He asked if it would suffice, and she thanked him. Then, in a shockingly swift and violent motion, she grabbed the gremlin and ripped a tuft of hair directly from its head, causing the creature to shriek as the students watched in horror. The sudden brutality left the young men stunned and speechless. Elena, however, remained perfectly composed, holding the clump of hair, her composure unbroken. She carefully placed the plucked hairs onto the handkerchief. With the sample secured, she turned back to Roland, informing him that she would deliver the evidence later. He and his companions could only stare, unsettled by her methods. The red-haired woman then approached Roland, voicing her concern. She asked if his divine power would affect harmless demons, pointing out that a familiar, a black cat, was in the courtyard and could be in danger. Roland reassured her, explaining he could contain his power within the building. He then noticed the cat, calling it Kuro-chan, and steeled his resolve for what was to come. His resolve hardened just as Prince Edward appeared, a confident smirk on his face. He goaded Roland, telling him to show everyone the full extent of a hero's power. With a determined expression, Roland agreed, preparing to summon his relic. He ascended the stairs, a small dwarven servant trotting dutifully at his heels. At the top of the landing, Renee waited for him, while Constance watched his departure from below, her gaze lingering on his retreating form. Standing on a grand staircase, Roland Valerie Oriole brings his hands together. He closes his eyes and begins an incantation, calling upon the divine sword in his own name to summon a wave of power. His eyes snap open, filled with fierce determination as he commands the weapon to appear. In response to his call, a torrent of white energy erupts, and the massive, ornate divine sword, Bel Grande, materializes in the air above him. Roland stands below, arms outstretched, presenting the summoned blade to all. Crystal stares, her hair stirred by the residual power, her mind reeling. She recognizes this as the true power of the hero. Behind her, Renee and another friend look on in utter shock. The commotion alerts the dwarven servants working nearby. One wonders about a noise from the downstairs warehouse, and another suggests they go investigate. From the top of the stairs, Roland glances down, his expression sharp and concerned. He and the other male students now gather around a table, looking at a piece of cloth. Roland points out with alarm that the ape-like fur they had collected is vanishing before their very eyes. At the same time, Crystal holds up a small, corked bottle. She exclaims that its contents, collected by Edith, are also disappearing, much to Renee's surprise. She reports this to Roland, asking if he has any results. He confirms that the divine sword's light revealed the evidence, and that his subordinates verified it. Furman adds that he saw it too, concluding that the creature must have been of demonic origin. Roland addresses the assembled students, declaring that with proof of a demon causing trouble on academy grounds, they cannot let it go. He announces the student council will begin an immediate investigation. He then turns to Crystal, stating they will also look into the suspicions surrounding the female student's fall. He raises his voice, adding a single, emphatic condition. However, Crystal and Renee look toward him, their expressions a mixture of surprise and anticipation. He points a finger directly at Crystal, his voice sharp. He declares that her suspicious attitude is a matter of fact, and that she should take this moment to reflect on her actions. The accusation hangs in the air as the great sword, its purpose served, vanishes from the floor, leaving only Roland standing in the vast hall as Maximilian watches from the side. Watching this unfold, Maximilian has a sudden realization. He thinks to himself that the one who caused this entire commotion was, in fact, Roland. He quickly seizes the opportunity to control the narrative. He announces that while there is much to discuss, they must first bring the situation under control. He loudly proclaims that thanks to His Highness Edward's magnificent and swift decision-making, a major incident was averted. This, he declares, is what everyone should be grateful for. His words have the desired effect, and the assembled students erupt in cheers, praising His Highness Edward's splendid performance. As the crowd celebrates, Roland watches on with a placid expression. He glances sideways toward Roland for a moment before puffing out his chest, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. His smug satisfaction does not go unnoticed. Crystal stares at him with a stern, unimpressed expression, thinking to herself that he's making that face again. Meanwhile, Roland approaches Crystal, explaining that it can't be helped. He has to save face for the first prince's faction. He acknowledges that what he's saying is troublesome, but asks if she would be willing to compromise this time. He then adds that since she seems angry, she should reflect on her own actions as well. She accepts his explanation, stating that she understands. She formally thanks him on behalf of the Jardier ducal family and the student body for his quick response that prevented a larger incident. Internally, however, She realizes he is far more splendid than he lets on, acting the fool for the sake of his friends and Adrian. She resolves to help him awaken his true potential sooner. With the matter settled between them, Roland turns to the group and suggests they all head to the salon. He then looks directly at Crystal, asking if she will be coming as well. He informed Maximilian that he still had something to attend to, but would join them shortly. Maximilian acknowledged this, agreeing to wait. Turning to leave, Maximilian explained his plan. He would report the resolution of the incident and present a gift to Crystal. He then tasked Roland with thinking over something in the meantime. Meanwhile, Roland rejoined his friends, laughing heartily. When asked if he was happy to have been chosen by His Highness, he clarified that he would be happy with anything that could soothe a woman's heart. His cheerful demeanor faded as he turned aside, a troubled expression crossing his face. He asked Crystal if it was truly all right for him not to accompany the prince. As he walked down a grand staircase, he found Crystal waiting at the bottom, her arms crossed. She addressed him coolly, calling him a mere follower. She continued, her gaze unwavering, questioning his actions. Her directness seemed to fluster him slightly. He explained that while summoning the divine sword is simple, he cannot return it to its original place. He must wait for it to disappear on its own. As he spoke, the immense, ornate weapon materialized in his hand. Crystal watched, realizing the divine sword was essentially at his beck and call. She recalled feeling a distinct chill when she had summoned it, an aura that was now completely absent. She wondered if he had somehow calmed it. Elsewhere, Maximilian approached Elena, expressing his relief that the situation had concluded safely. He informed her that he would be taking Belgrande and requested that she arrange for a carriage. As she acknowledged the order, shouts erupted in the background. The divine sword had vanished, and the hero was on the move. Elena then turned to Crystal and her companions, stating that she would arrange their carriage. One of Crystal's friends offered to escort the ladies. As preparations to depart are made, one of Crystal's friends approaches Roland on the grand staircase. With her hands clasped, she tells him his summoning of the divine sword was magnificent. Another of their companions, Estelle, chimes in, also offering his thanks. The friend continues with a bright smile, insisting it was no trouble at all, and asking him to tell her more about it sometime. For now, she explains, she must go check on someone named Kuro-chan. As she departs, Maximilian appears at the top of the stairs, waving cheerfully down to Roland, who looks up with a slightly surprised expression. He joins them, and Crystal takes the opportunity to thank Roland again. She explains that thanks to his help, she was able to clear her friend's name. Roland, looking away modestly, insists that he didn't really do anything. She smiles warmly, determined to express her gratitude properly. She asks if he would be willing to wait with her for a little while until her ride arrives. He agrees, but a sudden premonition washes over him. He has a feeling that what she is about to ask will be incomparably more troublesome than what occurred at the department store. Elsewhere, a group of dwarven servants grunt with effort as they force open a heavy, forgotten door. The door swings open to reveal a derelict stone corridor, its floor littered with debris, discarded weapons, and pieces of armor. One of the servants looks upon the scene in confusion, wondering what this place is. His gaze sweeps over the scattered equipment. He notes the old-fashioned swords, spears, and helmets, questioning what such things could possibly be doing here. Another servant lifts a large, ornate metal collar from the floor. He exclaims that it's a slave collar, an item outlawed half a century ago. With a growing sense of dread, he counts them, 10 in total. The servants watched as Crystal reacted with shock to the sudden appearance of the strange items. She exclaimed that they weren't there the day before, questioning aloud if it was the work of a gremlin. Maximilian stood beside her, deep in thought, his hand resting on his chin. The servants themselves could only murmur in confusion, one admitting he had no idea what was happening, while another simply noted that strange things were known to occur. With a grand castle looming in the background, the horned demon Lord Yami dramatically points at Roland, proclaiming him the divine hero who has once again saved the world. Roland, however, calmly refutes her, stating that is not the case at all. She lounges on a throne in an opulent hall, admitting she only intended to summon Belphegor and has no intention of letting Roland leave. Yami then asks if the last time he was summoned was during the era of Demon Lord Dorrance. Roland confirms this, adding that it was also during the behemoth subjugation a year prior. Suddenly, a cheerful young woman with long, flowing hair appears, introducing herself as the third princess and announcing her first request. This enrages Yami, who leaps to her feet, shouting that the second princess hasn't even had her turn with the hero yet, and warning the newcomer not to speak so casually. As the tension rises, Roland asks Yami if she is refusing the princess's request because she dislikes using force. Yami, now distractedly clicking an abacus, snaps back that romance is an entirely different matter. She leans in close, a sly smile playing on her lips, and asks if he is still single and not considering his future with a wife. A flustered Roland insists that's not it, prompting Yami to tease him for blushing. She continues to tease him, patting his head and declaring that he is always welcome with her, though not for the sake of world peace. Roland, clearly annoyed, tells her to stop. His expression shifts to one of serious contemplation. He reflects that while his parents had arranged a fiancée for him, he no longer has one. He considers it a blessing that the recent engagement annulment scandal didn't drag any other young ladies into his troubles. As they descend a grand staircase, Yami brings up an incident where she caused him trouble at the Russell department store. She muses that it wasn't just about brute force, but also affection, adding that selling cakes to the divine hero is an act of profound disrespect. He silently thinks to himself that he was merely lucky to have survived. The two are then seen from a distance, sitting on separate couches in a vast, ornate room, a heavy silence hanging between them under the light of a crystal chandelier. He sat on a couch, listening intently as his butler delivered the news. The individual in question had been released due to insufficient evidence. What did you say? Roland asked, taken aback. The butler explained that it seemed there had been pressure from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Standing beside the butler, Elena added a crucial detail. The current Minister of Foreign Affairs is the Earl of Amarju, Lord Dominic's father. Hearing this, Roland's mind raced. It seemed his suspicion that Dominic was somehow involved in the recent commotion was likely correct, but that still left the question. What about the perpetrators who had been apprehended? The butler provided the unsettling answer. Since the day after their release, their whereabouts had become unknown. They had vanished, he said, like smoke. Vanished, Roland repeated, a sense of foreboding washing over him. This was not good. He realized there was a risk of them seeking revenge against him or even Adrian. It would be wise to arrange for guards as a precaution. He turned to his butler. Gino, can you handle it? Gino gave a reassuring smile, telling him not to worry. He would investigate their movements now. Roland simply replied, yes, please do. As the two concluded their discussion, Renee spoke up from her seat. She mentioned that the house Pixies, along with Prince Edward and the others, had all left the salon together. Her words triggered a memory. Roland's eyes widened slightly as he touched his forehead. Ah, that's right, he murmured, recalling the house Pixies. He remembered their furious faces. The house Pixies had berated him for his disrespectful attitude, demanding he go and apologize to their group. If he didn't, they had threatened they would disappear from the estate forever. Back in the present, Elena stood and offered to accompany him. Roland looked up grateful. Thank you, he said. That would be a great help. Gino, ever the dutiful butler, added that he would prepare some sweets for the occasion. He recalled the recent student assembly, where Prince Edward had seized the opportunity to publicly decry the student council. With theatrical flair, the prince had declared the recent incident a direct result of their failure, all while Roland watched from the sidelines. The memory faded as Sophia, one of the maids, inquired about Prince Edward's well-being following the event. Roland hesitated, unsure how to respond. He let out a weary sigh, muttering that it was always the same story when it came to the prince. Indeed, the prince's reaction had been predictable. He had boasted to his companions about sending an extravagant bouquet to Lady Crystal, a gesture he considered far beyond ordinary. Returning to the present, Sophia shifted the topic, asking about Lady Adrian. Roland confirmed that he was, in fact, going to see her, a fact that seemed to please the maid. Sophia's imagination ran wild with an idealized version of events. Adrian, grateful and flustered, thanking Roland for his help. The reality, however, had been quite different. He recalled Adrienne's stern expression and her curt dismissal, a far cry from the romantic reunion Sophia envisioned. As they sat together, Constance voiced a cold political calculation, suggesting that for the good of the nation, it might be best if Adrian were simply eliminated. Elena readily agreed, seeing it as a convenient opportunity. Sophia looked on, aghast at their callousness. She expressed her disappointment, having believed their goal was to support Adrian. Turning to Roland, she asked if he was truly giving up on the young lady, calling it the best possible choice for her. Elena clarified their position. They would continue to feign cooperation with the prince's faction, so long as they didn't overstep. Constance added that while Adrienne's innocence was now clear, the prince's supporters still feared her retribution. For the time being, they would consider the matter closed. Roland absorbed this complex political maneuvering, quietly acknowledging that he understood. In a grand hallway, Crystal reflects that she was unable to expose Adrienne's scheme in that moment, only managing to drive her away. She notes that there was no sign of Crystal orchestrating anything herself. Elsewhere, Roland presses a hand to his forehead, overwhelmed. He wonders how he can possibly divert everyone's attention away from Crystal. His distress is evident to his staff. Sophia approaches him with concern, asking if he is feeling unwell. Roland, still rubbing his temples, admits that thinking about what lies ahead is giving him a headache. He suddenly stills, hand near his ear, wondering if he is imagining things. He realizes that lately he has been hearing a noise, a grating sound like gears that don't mesh properly being forced to turn. Later, in his study, Constance approaches his desk. She reports that the house Pixies, formerly in the service of a powerful noble family, have come to serve him. With this news delivered, she asks for confirmation. Has Prince Edward truly lost the allegiance of the house Pixies? He confirms that it is so. Constance explains that the Oriole ducal house is now refusing to lend the Pixies to Prince Edward, using their unrelated family ties as the official reason. Roland listens, finding the excuse to be rather dull. She argues that while the refusal has caused some anxiety among the populace, it is an undeniable fact that the prince's influence has been diminished as a result. He listens thoughtfully, chin resting on his hand. He then asks if she truly considers this a successful outcome. Before she can answer, he states plainly, a failure is a failure. A flustered Constance agrees with him. She begins to lament that if only their original plan had worked, to expose Prince Edward and have Adrian deposed, then things would be different. Her expression hardens into a scowl. She internally fumes about the useless demons she is working with, calling them a hindrance. She had given them another chance, and they merely sent a gremlin to perform some trivial task. She vows to make every last one of them pay for their incompetence. She resolved to find another way, a method to orchestrate the downfall of those two, which would, in turn, elevate Prince Jeremy to the throne. This line of thought brought back a memory for the prince. A time when he was a young boy, gazing listlessly out of his window when a voice called out to him. He looked down to see another boy in the garden, who curiously asked why he wasn't outside playing with the others. Startled by the direct question, the young prince slid open the window to get a better look at the stranger. The boy outside, Roland, cheerfully invited him to play. The prince explained that an illness prevented him from going outside. Undeterred, Roland offered a solution. He would share the blessing he had received from the fairy king by having the prince hold his hand. He reached out, taking the prince's hand in his own. Roland explained he was sharing a little of his blessing, hoping it would be passed on to him. Suddenly, a woman's hand snatched Roland's away, her sharp voice cutting through the air as she demanded to know what he was doing. She sternly ordered him not to associate with the prince and to come down at once. Seeing the interaction, the young prince quietly said he had to go. As he was pulled away, Roland waved brightly, promising they would meet again. The prince watched him disappear before turning his gaze down to his own hands. Later, sitting at his desk, he stared at his palms. A fine, shimmering powder now coated them, a tangible remnant of the shared blessing. Constance looks on, her expression shifting to one of quiet acceptance as she murmurs her assent. At the same time, Prince Jeremy's hand clenches into a fist. He affirms that there is still a chance, and if it means dragging his rivals to hell, he will reach out his hand as many times as it takes. His eyes narrow with cold resolve as he vows to himself that he will finally obtain it. His thoughts turn to a memory of a younger Roland, his determination fixed on a single goal, to win that beautiful, loyal heart. The question hangs in the air, is Roland the true target?